The atmosphere in the courtroom was heated to the max. The crowd, hungry for justice, settled under the windows, frantically demanded to punish the defendant. It is understandable, because the case was egregious and high profile. The murder of the businessman David Patrick Johnson stirred up not only the city, but the entire region. A son killed his own father. What can you say? The motive for the murder was banal and old as the world: money, inheritance, in general the most base passions. All the media of the region were abuzz about this news. Newspapers were full of headlines. Millionaire's son went for murder. Son kills his father, or the story of how money drives you crazy, and so on. The news appeared in the yellow press as well as in the serious publications of Boston. The common people were outraged. These rich people have gone completely crazy, they said, in stores, hospitals, public transportation. They think that because they have money, they can do anything. And the most desperate came to the courtroom and poured out their righteous anger. Murder for life. Let the murderer rot in prison, they chanted. Jessica, the defendant's stepmother, had a confused look. How can this be? Her eyes said as she married Johnson. She already had a son, Michael, who also attended the trial. He was one of the crowd of gawkers, while Jason, the rich man's native son, sat in the dock. Now that was ridiculous. Jason glanced furtively at his half-brother. Their gazes met for a second, and Jason saw the contempt in Michael's eyes. He turned away quickly, and the accused's expression returned to one of detachment. The look in Jason's eyes made it clear that he was resigned to his fate. He knew that his chances of acquittal were minimal, or, more accurately, non-existent. The people who disliked the children of the rich had long ago given Jason a verdict, and all he could do was wait. And what is there to wait for when the defendant's guilt is undeniable? There was concrete evidence against him. On August 13, 1999, Jason Patrick Johnson was apprehended in his father's office with a bronze candlestick in his hands, the prosecutor said in a monotone. At the time of discovery, David Patrick Johnson was already dead. According to witnesses, the defendant was covered in blood. Jason covered his eyes. It was clear as day to those present, but it wasn't to him. The boy had a lot of questions. For example, who had called the police? A mystery no one would ever solve, because no one would want to. I mean, here he is, ready. Not even a suspect anymore, but an accused, a defendant. So why solve anything? The lawyer took the floor. Alas, a public defender. Stepmother didn't have a dime for a good lawyer. Well, it was understandable. Jason Patrick Johnson, will you tell the court what happened? He asked the defendant. Despite his pessimistic attitude, the son of the murdered businessman did not think of giving up in the hope of getting the necessary testimony. Jason had been hinted more than once that he was in a bad way. But as his father liked to say, as long as we are alive, there is always hope. And the defendant began his story. On the evening of August 13th, I entered my father's office. What was the purpose of your visit? Inquired defense counsel. I wanted to talk about the division of the spheres of business, Jason replied. Suddenly he realized with horror that the provocative questions were about to begin. The division of business. You could say that's a motive, but a word is not a sparrow. Well, there's my father lying there covered in blood. Yes, he died in my arms, and I took the candlestick by accident, but I didn't kill him. Why would I kill my father, who was everything to me? For inheritance. I would have gotten my share anyway. You would have, Michael replied. Good point, brother. Jason made what he thought were reasonable arguments, but in vain. Everything pointed to the fact that he was the killer. In the name of the Russian Federation, Jason Patrick Johnson, born in 1965, is sentenced to 20 years in prison. A gloating murmur ran through the room, and the defendant thought detachedly, well, that's it. The jury took into account neither Jason's cooperation with the investigation, nor the presence of a young daughter, whom he raised alone. Jason's wife died in childbirth. I'll be back, he said when he was given the last word. I'll be back. I'm going to get justice. The press didn't even try to hide their smirks. It was too unbelievable. And everyone knew it when the convict was led away. He met Michael's gaze again and noticed the triumphant smile on his face. Why would that be? Or maybe it was just Jason's imagination that Johnson steps and turned away hurriedly, as if he didn't want anything to do with the killer. Tough luck, brother, Michael thought, and hurried out of the courthouse. Outside, the press was already waiting for him and his mother. No comment, waved away the newly appointed successor of the business from the representatives of the writing fraternity. Mother and son got into the car and drove away to the apartment, which was now at their complete disposal. 20 years had passed. Young, beautiful, expensively dressed brunette drove home, despite the fact that it was the second half of August. The heat outside was stifling. Jessica, the daughter of a wealthy businessman, drove up to the store to buy water and fruit. Today was her lucky day. Beautiful dark hair, pretty face. The girl noted with displeasure that the only place to park her foreign car was the corner, but there was nothing to do. Jessica turned off the engine and suddenly felt unbearably hot. It was weird. The air conditioning seems to be working, she thought. Why is it so hot? And when the girl smelled the smell of burning, she felt sick. But that was just the beginning. The car, literally cornered, suddenly caught fire and she was trapped. Jessica rushed to get out of the car, but there was no way. The plastic handle, which was already beginning to melt, did not give in, and the girl was almost resigned to the prospect of burning alive. But apparently there is a God in the world. A poorly dressed man appeared out of nowhere, homeless by the looks of it. Without wasting a second, he broke the glass and, risking his life, rescued Jessica from the fiery captivity. "Hurry up," he shouted, pushing the girl aside. The explosion could go off at any second. The car exploded a few seconds after the homeless man, along with Jessica, were a safe distance away. "Thank you so much." From the bottom of my heart, she thanked the homeless man. "After the shock, you're a very brave man." "No, really," he said, embarrassed. "No, really," exclaimed the girl. "After all, except you, no one dared to do such a deed. Tell me, how can I find you in case of emergency?" "In case of what?" hummed the homeless man, repeating Jessica's last words. Well, now she was embarrassed. "It's not a big deal. And I'm a stranger." Pilgrimy grinned. "Settled all this in the Boston train station area, so that's where you can look for me if you need me." She nodded with a smile, noting that her savior was quite young, perhaps even handsome. "And if you dress him up in decent clothes, oh God, I can't believe what I'm thinking," Jessica reminded herself. "I see," she nodded. "Good luck, and thank you." Likewise, the homeless man said, and walked away as if he'd never been there. Then the police, fire department, and tow trucks arrived. Jessica gave a statement, talked to the officers, and then called a cab and went home with a sense of accomplishment. "Why'd you take a cab?" Dad asked. "There's something wrong with the car," Jessica exclaimed, and recounted her misfortunes. "I see," he said dryly, and went into the house. She did not expect her father to be worried, and then offered her hot tea and a cozy warm plaid. In fact, there was no family connection between them. Michael was almost an uncle to Jessica. Why almost? Simple. He was the half-brother of her father, that is, Jason Johnson, who was convicted 20 years ago. Jessica knew that her own father had been sent to prison, from which he never returned. Michael's mother, Jessica Borisovna, had died a long time ago. As far as Jessica knew, she was terminally ill. The girl's foster father was a very unpleasant type. Michael constantly infringed on her and everything he touched. Jessica never received any pocket money from him, and those expenses, without which one way or another could not do without, were calculated literally to the cent. It was horrible. Jessica was so hurt, it was beyond words. If there was one thing he could save money on, it was his niece, his stepdaughter. The car Michael had bought her was a used car. He wouldn't have bought anything at all. But it is not proper for the daughter of a businessman to walk, ride the subway, not according to status. Her business acquaintances would have laughed at her, and the fact that the car is used, it's no big deal. No one would even check it, especially since the car looked quite presentable. Except, despite that, there was a fire. And if it hadn't been for that bum, Michael would have been preparing for her funeral. Jessica imagined for a moment what kind of funeral he would have organized, and he would have saved money. Cheap wreaths, cheap coffin. Naturally, no music, let alone makeup. Jessica shuddered. Ugh, she thought. I can't believe she'd think of such a thing. Thank God I'm still alive. That's just black humor. But seriously, Jessica was very hurt. She'd grown up in a wealthy family, lived in a beautiful 2-story mansion, but she had absolutely no privileges. The girl knew that her peers from wealthy families, if not laughing at her, then discussed her outfits from no longer relevant collections, or the same unfashionable car that had burned so ignominiously in the parking lot. And she understood them perfectly well. And Jessica also studied at the university on a budget. However, she didn't care about that. The scholarship, of course, was ridiculous, but it was still a penny. From time to time, Jessica thought that the reason for such attitude of Papa and Michael to her was that her father was Wesnan. But what was her fault? After all, children are not responsible for their parents. After taking a bath, she went to her room on the second floor, turned on her laptop, intending to watch some romantic comedy. Her cell phone rang. Dad, what did you want? I wondered. Jessica, I've been thinking, Michael said. Anyway, Why don't you invite that tramp over for dinner?" "What?" was the girl taken aback. "Michael," what the foster father chuckled. "You gotta respect the man. After all, he saved your life. Why would you insult him?" The tramp was a man too. Jessica didn't think to object to the last argument. The tramp was indeed a man too. It was just that such an invitation was too atypical for Michael. Even the average citizen didn't consider a homeless man a human being for tea. And even homeless people weren't considered as such. It's not like he got his head screwed on a winter's day in the sun. The next day, Jessica went looking for the stranger, Pilgrim as the homeless man called himself. It was a pleasure to find the vagrant. Settled in the train station area, Jessica remembered his words, so look for him there. What? Let's start there, she reasoned. Her search led her to a kebab shop in Station Square, where she thought the employees might know the tramp by sight. She decided to approach one of them. "Jessica, excuse me, do you know a homeless man? Tall, skinny, but pretty tough." The Caucasian kebab maker's wide, stinging black eyebrows crept upward, and Jessica, realizing that she had said something stupid, hastened to clarify that he was quite young. The kebab maker, smiling with dazzling white teeth, asked, "Why would such a pretty girl need some tramp?" He winked and added, "I'd rather come over tonight. We'll go to my place, bathhouse, sauna, kebab, beer, champagne." Jessica, "No, thank you," she politely declined. "I really need this particular tramp, on business." The kebab man, "What's his name?" There was disappointment in the young Jigit's voice. Jessica just sighed. The fact that she had forgotten to ask for a name was a big omission, though how was she to know that a vagrant might be needed by her father? "Jessica, I don't know." The kebab man, confused, "Well, maybe there's a picture." Jessica shook her head. The kebab man, "Strange thing, no name, no photo. How do you look for them then?" "There are as many as slaughtered around here, but I can help." He smiled meaningfully. Jessica, overjoyed, "Really?" The kebab man, "Sure, just one kiss and I'll help you." Offended, Jessica walked away. It took 2 more days to find her. She was helped by an observant boy of about 11, also a vagrant. The boy asked in a businesslike manner, tall, stout, "Could that be Max Pilgrim?" Jessica rejoiced, realizing she was on the right track. "Jessica, that sounds like him. Do you know where to find him?" The boy mouthed importantly, "I know, but that information costs money." Jessica gave him some money. The boy nodded. Then it's a deal, and led Jessica to some woods behind the station building. Julia suddenly thought that the boy had decided to take her into the woods and rob her. What if he killed her? Julia was suddenly terrified. She wanted to run away. But then something like a dugout came into view. "We'll stop here," said the young guide carelessly. "Give me the money." "But I haven't seen him," said the girl reasonably. "You think," said the boy approvingly. And they climbed inside. Michael Pilgrim was sitting at a table with a group of similarly poor people, eating quick noodles from a round paper bowl. An old electric kettle was boiling in the corner, standing on a large stump. "Hello," Julia greeted her savior, and, noticing his perplexed look, asked, "Didn't you recognize me?" "Should I? I mean, in general, to know you or should?" asked the tramp, which confused her very much. "2 days ago, you saved my life," she replied, pulling herself together. "There was a fire in my car, and you helped me out of it." "I did," Michael nodded. "As if it were no big deal, how could I ask for a light? And that my father told me to invite you to visit? He wants to thank you." "And I wanted," the tramp said firmly. "It's up to you, of course, but my father, you know," he said in a deep voice, "everything with you rich people is measured by money." "Why do you say that?" Julia thought. Money was out of the question, especially when someone like Papa David was involved. "Don't you want to thank me?" the enterprising boy reminded himself. "Yes, of course." Julia caught up and, taking $10 out of her purse, handed it to the young vagrant. He nodded in satisfaction. Then he was blown away. And Julia continued to persuade Michael. He was reluctant for a long time, but finally agreed. Why? The boy didn't know. Or maybe it was a premonition? Come in," David said, trying to sound like a hospitable host. Frankly speaking, Michael felt terribly uncomfortable. His gaze was too intense. It was like an X-ray. They went into the living room, where the table was set for 3 people. In the middle of the table stood a large plate of dumplings, a salad of tomatoes and cucumbers, and a basket of fresh bread. It all looked very appetizing. But the guest found such a table a little strange. It was not the way he had imagined a meal in a rich house. How could a vagabond know what wealthy people ate? Besides, he assumed that rich people might like homemade dumplings and simple salads. "Have a drink." David offered me a drink. "No, thank you." "I don't drink," Michael refused. "Maxim, you don't drink," said the host. "I think I'll have a gin and tonic." For about 20 minutes they were silent, concentrating on their food. The tramp ate carefully, without hurrying, and Julia liked it very much. "Actually, he doesn't look like a bum," it suddenly occurred to her. "Your name is Maxim, isn't it?" David asked his guest, even though the man had introduced himself to him. Maxim nodded. "Maxim, do you like Julia?" The tramp almost choked on his dumpling, and when he looked at the owner's daughter, he realized that she was close to the same. "And why this question?" asked the guest. "Well, just answer. Do you like it or not?" "Well, I like it," said Max. "Pretty, probably good character. And she's graduating from university this school year," David said proudly. "She's going to be a translator or something." "I'm happy for her," the homeless man nodded, not understanding what the questions were about. Julia didn't understand either, but she realized that her father had brought this up for a reason. "Oh, for a reason. I'm so glad," the landlord smiled. "Well, that's enough of that. I'd like to offer you Julia as my wife." "Well, a reward for what?" Max asked. "How could it be a reward for what?" "You saved her life," said the tramp. "I saved her life," said the tramp. All right, David said impatiently, thinking that the hobo was not so simple. "But it's okay. I've been screwed over before." "It doesn't matter," he said again. "I could use smart, capable guys like you, Maxim." "What about Julia?" David asked, perplexed. "Julia listens to me." So, looking at the girl, Max doubted it. Maybe she had obeyed her father before. This time, however, judging by the look on her face, she was the least likely to do so, and he wasn't far from the truth. "I always knew I wasn't loved," David sighed. Julia pondered. But this was too much even for him. How is it possible to marry without her knowledge? It's just unbelievable. "Isn't it, Julie?" he asked his daughter with pressure. "Daddy, I'm Julie, and I didn't know what to say," the girl admitted. In good conscience, I should have objected, but my tongue felt like it was stuck to the sky, and it was useless. If David Patrick Johnson had something in his head, then that was his final decision. Michael had enough of sitting. He got up and walked around the living room while father and daughter talked. The vagabond looked at the pictures without much interest, more of a machine. Suddenly one of the pictures caught his eye. "But it can't be," Michael thought, looking into the young man's face, unable to hold back the tears that came to his eyes. "Is something wrong?" Johnson inquired, noticing the look on his face. "Nothing's wrong," assured his guest, coping with his emotions. Michael sank into thought. The young drifter hadn't even realized that there were hidden sect cameras throughout the house. David Patrick Johnson had been suffering from persecution mania since childhood. He himself, however, he did not think so and said that he has a well-developed instinct of self-preservation. In addition, the businessman had one weakness: to observe people from the outside to analyze their behavior. This is an amateur psychologist for whom people are nothing more than puppets, Johnson reflected. Around the perimeter of each room, he ordered cameras to be installed. And now David, having seen his guest off, was reviewing the tape. Here they are having a conversation. And then, when I voiced my proposal, the bum gets up, walks around the living room, lingers on one of the pictures and cries. Yes, he was crying on the tape. It was very plain to see the tears running down this Michael's cheeks. And what would that mean? Thought a puzzled David. The photo the guest stopped beside was of his half-brother Jason Patrick Johnson. Does he really know the bum? The question continued to torment my father. But if that's really the case, where did they meet? We should take a closer look at him. Julia was looking at pictures from a classmate's birthday party when David knocked on her door. Offended, he stated. The girl remained silent. Julia, without saying a word, ran off to her room. This was more eloquent than any words, and it could not be said that David liked it. "Well, you should," he said conciliatingly. "He's not a bad guy. You should take a closer look." Julia didn't know what to say. All businessmen wanted to be related to their own kind, and they didn't have it all their own way. But on the other hand, the girl did not want to become the spouse of some businessman's offspring. Well, yes, what are they, if they do not have to fight for their place under the sun? Rich moms and dads are already all hustled up, she pondered. But Michael, Julia remembered the recent guest and suddenly thought that Daddy David was probably right. There was something about this guy. I guess that's charisma. And real, not created by expensive salons and hairdressers. But marrying him, Julia doesn't even know him. And if she did, then what? Mockingly asked the inner voice. And the girl realized she wanted to get to know Michael better. Her gut told her that this guy wasn't all that easy. So maybe she should really get to know him. But without getting married, of course. Now Julia knew where Michael lived, so now she wouldn't have to look for him. Michael Pilgrim occasionally worked part-time unloading merchandise at stores. That's what he did for a living. One of the places he worked part-time was a small store that sold confectionery. "Can I give you some more cake?" With a motherly look at Michael, Ann Adamson, the store owner, suggested. She really liked the guy. When Michael came to work part-time, Ann always had something tasty for her favorite. This kind woman of 50 years and a little always wondered why he did not study and did not try to realize himself. He's a capable boy, she thought. However, Ann never gave up hope of convincing the boy to think seriously about his life. "Ann, good afternoon," she heard a familiar voice. Jessica stood before her. "Hello, Jessica," spoke the shopkeeper affectionately. "Anything new?" "Suggest something new. I can recommend the chocolate pudding cake with strawberries." The salesperson smiled. "But your favorite red velvet is also available. It's all fresh, just unloaded." Ben. So what about the tactic? Julia turned to the handsome strange guy and exclaimed in surprise at Ben. "He's the one." Grinned the new acquaintances, you could say potential fiancés. "So you two know each other?" Ann Adamson was unknowingly delighted. "Well, sort of," Julia replied. "Sort of," she nodded. "I'll say more. Ben saved my life." "Really?" exclaimed the hostess in surprise. "Ben, is it true?" The tramp was modestly silent. Really, Julia answered for him. "Then we should drink to that." Adamson smiled at them. "Tea, of course. Come into my office." She knew it would be useless to contradict Ann, and she didn't want to. Julia had always enjoyed talking to this woman. They'd met at the gym, and despite the age difference, they'd become friends. 3 years have passed since then, but Julia's friendship with the owner of the confectionery store only grew stronger. Sometimes the girl thought that the main reason for her affection for Ann was that she grew up without a mother. In addition, the relationship with Daddy Michael left much to be desired, and Ann Adamson was simply impossible not to love. Kind, open, with a great sense of humor, and always ready to come to the aid of someone who needs it. That's just the way she was. Anyway, Julia and Ann Adamson were friends, and now it turns out that the eldest friend of Michael Johnson's adopted daughter knows Ben. So maybe it's fate. What did you do to please him? Very nice conversation this time. Julia was pleasantly surprised by Ben. What a smart, well-read guy. The girl thought with surprise. Very good. Ann Adamson whispered to her, catching the moment, and added with an obvious hint. He would like a girl who would take him in hand. But where would he get one? "How long have you two known each other?" Julia asked Ben as they left the store. "No," he shrugged. "I've been coming here part-time for a few months." "Tell me a little about yourself," she asked. "Wouldn't you like to?" But Julia was silent. Something told her that Ben might not like her question. But having said, speak, she looked at him with interest and was definitely waiting for an answer. Julia continued, "Wouldn't you like to get an education, get a good job, and in general live like a normal person, you mean?" Ben asked mockingly. "What's your problem? How am I supposed to live?" "There's no sadness," the surprised girl replied. "It's just that everything is easy for you." The tramp cut him off and walked toward the bus stop. Julia stared after him in despair, and suddenly, as if not realizing what she was doing, ran after him. "Ben," she shouted. But the boy didn't even turn around. Ben, Julia caught up with the tramp after all, and just in time. Because at that moment a bus was coming, heading towards the bus station, and the girl miraculously managed to jump on it. "Ben, what did I ask you?" she exclaimed. "For someone like you, maybe nothing." Ben shrugged. "Well, to anyone. Everyone's the same. Everyone." Not everyone. Ben realized with horror that he was attracted to this girl, but he realized there was no future for them. No matter what her father said, Ben would be something to him. And then he suddenly remembered how this guy had offered him Julia as his wife, and he hadn't failed to publicize it. He said she was going to university. She'd be a translator or something. So he said, "Good daddy, he doesn't even know what his daughter will be when she graduates. He doesn't seem to want to know." That's how you treat a kid. Ben suddenly felt sorry for the girl. Why did he really yell at her? Those eyes like a hurt little girl's. "I'm sorry about that," Ben said awkwardly. I don't know what came over me. Apology accepted. Julia smiled. Ben, aren't you in a hurry? No, he smiled back. There's a suggestion we sit in a cafe somewhere. To be honest, she hadn't really hoped Ben would agree. But suddenly, okay, replied the hobo, but on one condition. And what condition is that my treat? They sat in the cafe for about 2 hours and couldn't get enough of each other. How does he know so much? Julia wondered. None of these down-and-out majors could match Ben. It's getting dark, the boy noted. Yeah, it's getting dark early now, Julia agreed. You should walk, he suggested. What about you yourself? Chuckled his new friend. I don't burn in fire. I won't drown in water. You don't believe me? I believe, smiled the girl, looking thoughtfully into his eyes. You see, Michael was surprised, looking out the window, and yet she took offense. I, you might say, arranged her fate. The businessman looked curiously at the couple and waited for them to kiss. However, there was no kiss. Julia touched the tramp's shoulder and went home. How was your day? Michael asked good-naturedly. Fine, Julia nodded. It's that Ben. He's the foster daughter. So you two are dating. Daddy, Michael, you're so full of shit. The girl shook her head. Ben was with us 3 days ago. 2 of those days I didn't go anywhere, so when would I have started dating him? Well, yes, Johnson nodded absent-mindedly. I'm sorry, I wasn't thinking. Well, then we'd better speed it up. As an intelligent man, Michael knew he shouldn't do it out of the blue. Otherwise, it could spook the target. Julia should be pushed into it gradually. But to the businessman's great joy, he didn't have to do anything. He hired a private detective to follow Julia. And a week later, the bloodhound reported that the young people were dating. Well, the plague, he thought with satisfaction, looking at the photos that confirmed that his adopted daughter had indeed started dating Skies. Julia, what does your boyfriend do? Michael inquired. Ben works part-time at the stores, she replied. As a salesman? No, of course not, Julia grinned, picturing her boyfriend behind the counter, unloading merchandise. And, is he okay with that? Why am I asking? I'd like to offer him a job at my place. What kind of work? You know, like a security guard or something. We'll figure it out. That kind of generosity was unusual for Michael. I mean, what's weird about it? After all, he had already identified Ben to take. And, to tell the truth, the idea now seemed quite tempting to Julia. But the question is to get Ben to agree, she said thoughtfully. Why wouldn't he? He might, she confirmed sullenly. Michael was even more surprised. And how does he plan to spend the rest of his life in a shack? What, in the woods behind the train station? Julia wondered. And really, what is he going to do next? After that incident in the candy store, Anne had never asked Ben about his plans again. After all, he's a grown man and surely knows what he wants out of life. Julia silently shrugged her shoulders, and Papa Michael said, Anyway, dear, I'll say this, if you want to help your beau, and by the way, talked yourself into it. After all, it's in your best interest too. Johnson winked at his adopted daughter, and she felt uncomfortable, but deep down Julia really wanted to. So why not talk to Ben? What was there to hide? Ben Adams wanted to start a new life. He'd had enough of vagrancy. Although at first it had seemed to him in some way exciting, a kind of adventure. But it could only be interesting when he was young. And unfortunately is not eternal. Ben didn't like Michael Johnson, the slippery type. But on the other hand, was this any chance? No, he wasn't after riches, especially since none were in sight. And Ben wanted to be with Julia. And what could he offer her? Living in a dugout. So when his lover suggested working for her adoptive father and living in a mansion, Ben said that was probably an option. Well, what am I saying? Julia rejoiced. 2 weeks later, the former tramp and the entrepreneur's daughter got engaged. Michael's business partners, if they were surprised, didn't show it. They weren't interested in the identity of this poor man. Michael was also just glad that everything worked out the way he wanted it to. When Ben came to him for the second time, Michael said that he would keep order. When asked by the boy what exactly he was supposed to do, Johnson replied, make sure no crap got into the house. Michael was actually one of the residents of the mansion. Once handed over, his duties completely derailed. Everything would have been fine. But Michael puzzled over the question of how the future son-in-law knew his half-brother. In the end, the businessman decided to talk to him straight since Julia and this tramp were doomed. Anne, do you know where Ben is now? Johnson asked the elderly maid. I think he was in the garden with Julia. Well, call him to me, he ordered. Call him in, Ben asked, catching him in the study. Not summoned, but invited. We're practically related, the future father-in-law smiled, though the smile was more like a grin. So what did you want, Michael Vladimirovich? Ben asked impatiently. He didn't like being around this man. Ben decided when he and Julia got married, he would move out of his place. It was unlikely that the bride would mind. I was wondering what your connection is to my half-brother. The day I took you out to lunch, you were looking too closely at one photo, and I think you even wept. What do you mean? Ben saddened and began to tell his sad story. After the sentencing, Jason Johnson's attorney appealed, but all he got for his client was a penal colony instead of a maximum security prison. There he met Ben's mother, who worked as a cook. Uncle Jason was like family to me, the future son-in-law said. A good man. You probably know he died of pneumonia, Michael nodded thoughtfully, looking out the window. Where is your mother now after Jason's death? Ben's mother, Olga, didn't want to move on after that. They dreamed of a new life after Jason's release. By the way, he was given a lesser sentence, so the return was real. The young woman did not come to terms with the loss of her beloved and became addicted to alcohol. That's what ruined her. Ben sighed. Suddenly he was angry with himself. And why the hell am I pouring my heart out in front of this moral freak? This is my personal business. Go on, Michael said. Ben remembered what his uncle had said about his daughter. So Julia was that daughter? God, it was a good thing his future father-in-law and former stepfather had turned out to be half-brothers. Otherwise, Ben wouldn't even want to think about it. There's nothing to go on, really, he shrugged. How come you started vagabonding? After his mother died, Ben traveled to Boston for a new life, but the city didn't welcome him too warmly. The day he arrived, Ben got a job at a construction site and his passport was taken away. Fortunately, he had some money and he rented a small house on the outskirts. After a month, his paycheck was still not paid. He had to move out. The employers probably thought that without a passport he would not go anywhere, but he didn't. So Ben had to live on the streets. The bride's father was shocked at the turn of events. What a coincidence, some vagrant, the son of an alcoholic, turns out to be related to his brother. This did not make the businessman happy at all. He decided to get rid of the uncle and at the same time from the adopted daughter. But in order not to look suspicious, Michael would arrange their wedding. The newlyweds would be in his care, and then he would get rid of them both in one fell swoop. He was plotting a brutal plan to destroy the bride and groom. Johnson took over his son-in-law's paperwork. In early October, Ben and Julia became husband and wife. The wedding was modest. Why splurge if they were doomed anyway? But it didn't matter to Ben and Julia. They were together and knew that their married life would be happy regardless of Michael's money. They were determined to make a month's worth of money. Ben said after the wedding banquet, "That's the way it is. We'll live here, and then I'll raise money for a rented apartment. Do you agree?" "Of course I do," Julia exclaimed. A couple days after the wedding, they went to see Ann Adamson. Maybe she'd have some good advice, they thought. "Well, first of all, congratulations," said Ann with a smile. "And secondly, I'd love to help the new family." "Ben, I thought you said you worked in construction." "I did," he grimaced, remembering the way his employer had treated him. "But then you've got the job in your pocket. A good friend of mine is doing repairs at the cottage. It's nothing special, just cosmetics. Can you do it, of course?" "I can do it," Ben assured him. The acquaintance turned out to be a nice man of about 45. He paid the Johnson couple in advance. Part of the money they put aside to rent an apartment, the rest they spent on living. True, there wasn't much money. David Patrick Johnson had no intention of helping the new family. He wasn't expected to. Ben and Julia were eagerly counting the days until they finally moved in with Michael. Nothing else mattered. However, fate had it differently. Maid Amber worked for David Patrick Johnson for 20 years, and all this time she and Julia had a tender and touching relationship. The girl lacked a woman's affection, and this kindest of women, God had not given her children. How unfair is life. When you and Ben have children, they'll be my great-grandchildren, Amber said dreamily. But of course Julia smiled, just as long as it wasn't as a maid. That was the way she'd hoped it would be. "Amber, come into my office," Michael's commanding voice broke the idyll, which didn't bode well. "Is something wrong?" she asked timidly. "You'll find out," the master said. Michael informed the old maid without any preamble that she was fired. "But for what?" a stunned Amber whispered. "Why," Michael said, "it's your age. You've done your time. It's time to retire." The you thing was jarring, but she didn't seem to mind it at the moment. Amber was more concerned with what she was going to live on. "You've been working here for 20 years, David Patrick Johnson added. "I'd like to see some new young faces in my house. And imagine if Jessica and I have a baby." And who's going to help them with the baby? You. The old one. Yes, for me it would be happiness. Through tears answered the old assistant. Julia's like my own granddaughter, and now it's not a good time. He continued in his mind and ordered Amber to go pack her things. Okay, I'll leave with dignity, the assistant said, and went to her room. Amber packed her things and tears ran down her cheeks. She considered herself part of the family. Well, it seemed the master didn't think so. There he was, easy on the eyes. Amber, you'll take the check, David Patrick Johnson said, entering without knocking. He didn't even think about the fact that the maid might have changed clothes, but at least he didn't poke. Thank you for that. What pleasure would she have had throwing that envelope of money at that arrogant face? Except there wasn't a dime in her wallet. The card was empty too, so she overcame her pride, nodded, and put the money in the big plaid bag. When Michael left, Amber counted the money in the envelope, and it was exactly half of what she'd gotten. She didn't bother to confront him. She gathered her things and, swallowing tears, left the room. She wanted to leave unnoticed, but that wish wasn't going to happen. Amber, where are you going? Julia asked, not without surprise, as she walked up the stairs. And when she saw the tears in her eyes, she realized everything. What's wrong with you? He frowned. Amber said bitterly, Oh, come now, Mr. David. I'm old. It's time for a vacation. I can't cope, it seems. That's not true, Julia said hotly. You're doing a fine job. What's the matter now? Sighed the one that colored her not-so-happy childhood. Suddenly, Julia whispered, I need to talk to you. I'll be waiting for you in the park. The serious expression on Amber Adamson's face didn't just say. It screamed that she was about to tell Julia something very important. She was even getting a little scared. Okay, the foster daughter nodded. I'll be there in about 20 minutes. It was 20 years ago, Amber Adamson began. I had just come to work for David Patrick Johnson, your grandfather. Back then, Johnson's former maid fell silent. It was terribly difficult for her to talk about it. And what happened? Breathlessly, Julia asked. Then your grandfather was killed, the older woman whispered, and what a terrible guess flashed through her brain. But Julia refused to believe it. My father was in jail for that. Yes, for that, Amber Adamson confirmed in a trembling voice. The girl covered her mouth with her hand in horror. So this was why Papa Michael didn't love her. Everything fell into place. But he didn't. He didn't, Julia interjected incredulously. Then who did? Jason Patrick Johnson, are you sure? Are you sure? Amber Adamson said firmly. I saw it with my own eyes. It was Jason Patrick Johnson who hit his father over the head with a candlestick and then flipped it around as if Michael had done it. Jason Patrick Johnson called him into David Patrick Johnson's office on some pretext specifically to set him up, and then called the police. Everything pointed to Michael as the killer. I mean, he kept saying he didn't do it, but who'd listen to him? I mean, that's the way it is here, isn't it? If there's a man, there's a story, isn't there? Yes, Julia said with a sigh. I'm sorry, girl, that I've been quiet all this time. I was just afraid that Jason Patrick Johnson might have straightened me out as well. Julia was shocked. And that Daddy Michael was afraid all along, she realized, afraid of being exposed. It was reckless of him to fire Amber. I guess he figured that since she'd kept quiet for 20 years, the secret would die with her. Well, it didn't. I understand, Julia said, and burst into tears, hugging the maid. To her, she was like family, if not closer. For about 10 minutes they sat hugging, and then Julia said quietly but firmly, "You won't get away with it this time. But the statute of limitations. I'll do whatever it takes to get the case overturned," she said firmly, and took her cell phone out of her pocket and dialed the emergency number. Ben walked home after work and thought about the fact that it wasn't long before moving into a rented apartment. What are the police doing here? Ben was frightened when he saw a blue and white car outside his house. He loved his wife Julia very much, and the first thing that came to his mind was, has something happened to her? And when he saw someone being let out, his heart jumped fearfully somewhere in his stomach. Did Michael massacre his adopted daughter? Ben quickened his step, but a policeman blocked his path. "Your papers," he said sternly. "Please," Ben replied, and pulled a passport from the inside pocket of his jacket. "This is my husband," said a perfectly alive and well Julia. "He's here from work. Well, I see." The law enforcement officer nodded. For good measure, still looking at Ben's passport, he explained. A criminal case has been opened against Michael Johnson, as Julia had anticipated. The statute of limitations had been disregarded. Her father was posthumously rehabilitated, and his half-brother went to prison. He was charged not only with murder, but also with perjury. All the assets that Michael had went to the rightful owner, that is, the native daughter of the wrongfully convicted Jason Patrick Johnson. Julia, of course, was glad that justice had been served, but if it could bring her father back. "Don't be sad," Ben said quietly as he put his arm around his wife's shoulders. "I'm sure Uncle Jason is watching us from heaven and rejoicing for us. You're right." "You think so?" Julia smiled. "I am sure of it." A month passed. Ben and Julia, though they were already married, decided to have a wedding again. Like the previous one, it wasn't too crowded, but it was very beautiful. For the banquet, they chose one of the best restaurants in the city. "This is the kind of wedding you deserve," exclaimed Amber Adamson, who was the guest of honor, if it weren't for her confession and then testimony in court. Ben and Julia would most likely no longer be in the world. She was now living with them as part of the family. Michael was right. The old housekeeper really should have taken a well-deserved vacation. She could babysit her grandchildren. By the way, the first grandson or granddaughter was due in a few months. Another guest of honor was, of course, Ann Adamson. The wedding cake in the form of a castle in paradise looked like a real masterpiece. "I love you fondly," Ben said. "And I you," Julia replied. "I hate to think what would have happened if my car hadn't burst into flames." And they laughed merrily. "That's it. I've had enough of this. I'm filing for divorce," said the wife to her husband. At these words, the husband became numb. "That's it. I can't live with Nick anymore. I'm filing for divorce." Anastasia sat in her sister Nayli's kitchen and complained about her husband. "I can't take it anymore. I've lived with him for 28 years, and now everything about Nick annoys me. The way he eats, the way he sleeps, the way he walks around the apartment in his slippers. I can't stand him anymore. I want to live for myself for the rest of my years." "Anastasia, what will you do with the apartment?" Nayli asked anxiously. "I don't think it's possible to exchange it without paying extra. You can't throw Nick out on the street. He has a share in the apartment too. You'll live like neighbors in a communal apartment? How are we living now?" Anastasia was indignant. "After my daughter got married and moved in with her husband, Nick lives in one room and I live in the other. Only I still wash his clothes, cook his meals, clean on weekends, and he comes home from work and falls on the couch. Never once cleared a plate off the table. Do you know how much money he makes?" Anastasia grinned. "I'm ashamed to say. How many times have I told him, change jobs, but the only thing I've heard is, I'm fine with it, and I'm sick of carrying everything on my shoulders." "Oh, I don't know what to tell you." Nayli shook her head. "It's hard to live alone, too. I know how it is. When my Matthew was alive, I didn't like a lot of things about him either, and when he was gone, it was as if the light had faded." "I won't be alone," Anastasia said nonchalantly. "And if I don't meet another man, it's okay. Without a man, too, you can do just fine. Remember how in the movie Girls the main character said, 'I decided not to marry at all. One is calmer. I want lackeys. I want gingerbread.' But you loved Nick once, didn't you?" Nayli shook her head. "Even scandalized her mother and threatened to leave home if she did not allow you to marry a colleague Titov. You didn't listen to anyone and did it your own way. You could have talked her out of it." Anastasia looked angrily at her sister. "Maybe my life would have turned out differently." "You're telling me." Nayli shook her head again. "If you've got it in your head, no one can change your mind. It's bath time." Nayli got up from her chair. "Let's have a steam. It'll get the crap out of our heads." Anastasia stood up and stretched. "I need to warm up my bones, because my back has been aching lately before the bath." Anastasia went out into the yard and sat down on a bench that stood near the Pamiatnik. It's a pity they sold her parents' house, she thought, looking across the street. It would be a good place to come back to. She grinned. I can't live in the country again. I was used to city life, and I needed the money. I'd just gotten a 2-room apartment. I had to furnish it. The money from the sale of my parents' house came in handy. and we spent it on a car. I wanted to please the man I loved, Anastasia grumbled, deciding to get some fresh air. Nelly came out of the anteroom. Breathe, breathe. You don't have this in the city. It's all chemistry. When I come to the city, I get a headache. How do you live there? I've lived in the country all my life and I'm not going anywhere. Call me a hillbilly. I was born here, I'll die here. Yeah, life has flown by and I haven't even lived it yet, Anastasia sighed, squinting against the bright sun. I just got married and had a daughter, and I might be a grandmother soon. Anastasia had known Nick since she was a little girl. He was best friends with her older brother Andrew. They went to school together, went swimming at the river, and raced bicycles. Benjamin always tried to follow Andrew, but he always chased him home and even swore at him. But Anastasia didn't care. She was secretly in love with Dan Titov, who seemed much older than her brother and did not even hide from anyone that he was already smoking cigarettes, although he was barely 14 years old. The sun's rays penetrated through the curtains, waking Nick from a deep sleep. He took after his father. He grumbled to his mother, Rosalie. I suppose he's going to end up with an alcoholic and a companion like Dan. Good thing Carla got rid of her husband. He'd frozen to death outside his house drunk in the winter. They found him in the morning. Anastasia paid no attention to her mother's nagging, continuing to stare at Nick with loving eyes. Except that to him she was still little, as he called her, even though she was only 2 years younger. When Andrew left for the army, Nick was taken too. Anastasia wrote letters to her brother, saying hello to Nick, and was very happy when in a return letter her brother wrote back to her saying that Nick sends his warm army greetings to you too. After graduating from the 8th grade, Anastasia decided to enter the culinary school, although her mother suggested that she go to the city and apply to the trade school. But she did not want to go far from home, because in a year were to return from the army Andrew and Nick Thompson. Nelly had married by then, moved into her husband's house, and was expecting her second child. She rarely visited her mother and sister, because she had no time to be with her own family. In the evenings, Anastasia and her mother dreamed that when Andrew returned from service he would marry Vivian. Although Vivian, who faithfully waited for him from the army all 2 years, she sometimes ran to Anastasia, bragged that she had thought up the style of the wedding dress, and white shoes, which she and her mother bought in the city department store, were already lying in the closet in a cardboard box, waiting for the celebration. When Andrew and I have a baby, Vivian said cheerfully, you'll be his godmother. I want a son to be the firstborn. She rolled her eyes dreamily. And then we can have a couple of girls. But the main thing is that the first must be a son. Oh, you're dreaming. Rosalie looked affectionately at the future daughter-in-law. It's hard to manage with 3 children. I know myself nothing. I am strong, laughed Vivian. And with a husband like Andrew, I can do everything. Vivian continued to dream. He grew up caring, hardworking, and handsome. Other girls envy me that a guy like him could love me. You'd think I was ugly. Oh, no, Rosalie shook her head. You and my Andrew are a very good couple, and I'm very glad you're getting married. We just have to wait a few months until he comes back, and then we'll want a wedding like this. 3 days of celebration. If only my Anastasia could find a good groom. Then I'd have peace of mind for all my children, Rosalie sighed. But her mother, embarrassed, Anastasia ran off to the other room. Rosalie and Vivian laughed loudly. But the dreams were not destined to come true. A month before the end of the service, Andrew died. No one knows how it happened. Or rather, the command, of course, knew the circumstances of his death, but said only one thing: an accident. From grief, Rosalie in a flash grayed and could not believe that in a closed coffin is her son Andrew. It's not him, not him. She wailed at the cemetery, watching the grave mound grow. I just recently received a letter from Andrew, in which he wrote that he would soon return home. Mom, calm down, Anastasia, clinging to her mother, trembling with all her body, begged, "Let's go to the wake. Everyone's already there." Rosalie swore after her daughter, turning to look at the fresh grave where her only son lay. Soon Nick returned from the army and, without going home, went straight to the Martyanovs. Seeing him, Rosalie splashed her hands, hugged Nick, and wept bitter tears. "You tell me that my Andrew is alive." The woman looked hopefully at Nick. "We saw you off to the service together, so you must return together. Tell me that you deceived me, brought to the coffin of another man's son." "No," Aunt Rosa. Nick shook his head. "Not deceived." He sighed heavily. "I'm sorry." Bye. Nick quickly went out into the yard, sat down on a bench, and lit a cigarette. Nick didn't notice how Anastasia silently walked over to him and sat down next to him. "Welcome back," she said quietly. But Nick shuddered with surprise. "Oh, I'm scared." He almost dropped his cigarette and smiled. "Wow, how you have grown, quite a bride has become." "How did Andrew die?" Anastasia asked quietly again, staring off into the distance. "I don't know," Nick answered hastily. "I was on leave that day, and when I returned to the unit, I was told that Andrew..." He was silent again. "In short, that Andrew is no longer there, and no one explained the reasons to me. You know, the army, there is a lot of secrecy." In fact, Nick lied. He knew that his best friend died because of him, and now he was tormented by conscience. On another leave, Nick met a girl and started dating her, but she had an older brother who was strongly against it. He warned Nick that if he did not get away from Grace, he would be in big trouble. But Nick only grinned, saying that nothing would scare him. On that fateful day, Nick and Andrew walked out of the unit together to go about their business. Nick was excited about his date with Grace, and Andrew decided to buy gifts for his family. After all, he was about to be discharged soon, and he wanted to return home not empty-handed. They had barely rounded the corner of the concrete fence when they ran into a group of guys, including Grace's older brother Benjamin. He looked at Nick sternly. "I warned you to back off my sister. Well, now hold on." Benjamin swung and hit Nick with all his might, who fell to the ground. But he jumped up and came at him. A fight ensued. Andrew could not stay away and rushed to help his friend. Benjamin took a knife out of his pocket and wanted to stab Nick with it. But it so happened that the knife hit Andrew right in the heart, and he fell down. Everyone froze, not expecting such an ending. "Cops!" shouted Benjamin, and the boys scattered. Nick ran after them. He wandered around the city for a long time and returned to the unit only in the evening. There he was told that Private Andrew Martyanov was killed. There were no more details. Nick was interrogated, as it should be, because he was seen leaving the unit together with Andrew. But he, afraid that he could go to the brig, said that as soon as he and Andrew went out of the gate, they went in different directions. And he knows nothing more. Until the end of the service, Nick was afraid that the command of the unit guessed that Andrew died because of him, and even stopped going on leave. But everything went well. He was no longer summoned for interrogation. And now, looking at Anastasia, he felt ashamed of her and Aunt Rosa, that they had lost a son and a brother. "It's me," Nick got up from the bench. "If you need anything, contact me to help with the household or something else. After all, Andrew and I were best friends. I, so to speak, will help you." "Thank you," Anastasia looked at him gratefully. "And then Mom says that we are completely without male hands left. Even digging the vegetable garden is now no one." "Not a problem," Nick said. "I'll come to you tomorrow morning." But in the morning, Nick did not show up. All night he celebrated his return with his friends. and in the morning he was hungover. He went to bed and slept through the night. "So where is your assistant?" Rosa asked her youngest daughter snidely. "I guess I shouldn't have praised her yesterday that Nick would help us with everything. I'll have to go back to Jake's house again. He'll do anything for a bottle. Last time he dug our garden so hard, nothing grew. But there's no way out. I don't have any strength left. And look at you. Skinny, you can't hold a shovel." "Mom, you'll see. Nick will come," said Anastasia, looking out the window. "He promised to help us in everything instead of Andrew." "Oh, Andrew, my darling son," Rosalie wailed. "And who did you leave us for?" Anastasia did not listen to her mother and ran out of the house. She walked along the country road and, reaching the house where the Titovs lived, looked through the fence into the yard. Aunt Carla was doing chores, and Nick was nowhere to be seen. "Something's peeking out," Helia Swan, Nick's friend, sneaked up on her. "Why don't you come inside?" "I'm not looking at anything," Anastasia replied fearfully. "I was just passing by and stopped for a moment to catch my breath." Well, well, well," laughed Helia. "And I already thought that you decided to visit some fiancé? After all, we haven't seen each other for 2 years. Probably missed you." He laughed out loud again. "It's too much." Anastasia stepped away from the fence and walked away. But she heard Helia enter the house and shouted loudly, "Nick, stop snoozing, you already have brides waiting for you at the gate." Anastasia blushed and walked even faster towards her house. She thought that Nick had forgotten his promise. And what was her surprise when, waking up in the morning, she went out into the yard and saw him in the garden with a shovel in his hands. "Come on, show me which beds to dig." He squinted against the bright sun. "Sorry I couldn't come yesterday. I was celebrating my return from the army. You should understand." "I understand," Anastasia nodded her head. "You dig, and I have to get ready. I'm going to miss the bus." "Where are you going this early in the morning?" Nick wondered. "Are you in a hurry to go on a date?" "What date?" Anastasia laughed. "At the school, I go to class in the morning and then come home in the afternoon. I was offered a dorm room, but I turned it down. How can I leave my mom alone? I've been driving back and forth all week. Good thing it's vacation soon, I won't have to go anywhere." "Be careful," Nick grumbled. "And if anyone hurts you, tell me right away." "Oh, who needs me?" Anastasia was embarrassed, but she was glad that Nick was worried about her. From that time, Nick began to come sometimes to the Martyanovs' that fence fixes, or the doors in the barn. "Mom, look, what a hard worker, Nick," said Anastasia with delight. "He's helping us like he promised." "Yes," Rosalie said. "But that hard worker always smells so bad that it's impossible to stand next to him." "So what?" Anastasia shrugged. "A man can have a drink after work, can't he?" "Oh, Anastasia," Rosalie shook her head. "You're still young, you don't understand a lot of things. If a man drinks, it's bad for the family. The wife, the children, and the rest of the family suffer. Look at our neighbors Timofeevs. Their Pete's been drinking as long as I've known him. His wife Nancy has come to our house barefoot and with babies to escape her husband's wrath. Why doesn't Aunt Nancy divorce Pete?" Anastasia asked in surprise. "Why should she put up with such an attitude?" "Where would she go?" Rosalie sighed. "She's got 2 kids on her hands, and now she's pregnant with her 3rd. She has no help from anyone. Her parents are dead. She will endure her husband's antics for the rest of her life. And she loves that alcoholic. She admitted it herself." "No, I couldn't do that," Anastasia shook her head. "I would have filed for divorce right away." "Easy to say, but hard to do," Rosalie grinned. "Not every woman would decide to get a divorce. and we don't like divorced women. Even if she were a widow, there's nothing you can do, fate. But divorced women are like some kind of lepers. You can't invite them to your house. She may look back at another man's man. It's medieval, Anastasia laughed. We passed in school. I do not remember in which country, but if a husband died, they killed his wife and buried her next to him. And in another country, I don't remember which one, if an older brother died, the younger brother got his wife, Anastasia continued. And no one asked if he wanted to marry her or not. Holy, holy. Rosalie crossed herself on the icon. Such wild customs. Thank God we do not have such a thing. In the fall, Nick decided to go to the city. He got a job and now he rarely came to the village, and Anastasia became sad. Every weekend at a certain time she passed by the stop where the bus stopped, hoping to see Nick. But alas, her expectations were in vain. A year later she graduated from college and got a job in a canteen. One day she was returning from work and saw Nick walking towards her. Oh, Anastasia. Nick. He looked at her. You look different. You look so much prettier. I didn't even recognize you at first. How are you? I'm not married yet, Anastasia said, embarrassed. What about you? You haven't gotten married? I'm going to. Nick grinned. I've come to choose a bride. Pick a bride? Anastasia asked. Didn't you find one in town? No, not in the city, Nick grinned. There are too many demands. They give flowers, candy, gifts, and in general they're kind of spoiled. You have to take care of them, bring coffee in bed. Ugh. He spat on the ground. A wife should take care of a man, feed him, do his laundry, understand? Not the other way around. That's how it is in our village. The man is the master of the house, and the wife must obey him in everything. That's why I decided to choose a bride from the locals. Why do you want to get married? Anastasia was surprised, and even so urgently. Nick lit a cigarette. I now work at the factory. I live in a dormitory. And they say that families can get an apartment. So I decided to get married, to get a separate place. And then I can get a divorce. No one will take my apartment away from me. He looked Anastasia over from head to toe. By the way, would you marry me? Nick asked. You're not a spoiled girl, you're not spoiled. You won't claim my apartment. So will you marry me? Or should I give you time to think about it? No, Anastasia shook her head quickly, not believing her happiness. I'll do it. Well, that's the deal. Nick looked at his watch. We'll have a proper wedding. Or, they will start to talk in the village. Come on, get ready. And I'll tell my mother to call the guests. I'll leave the money for her for a treat. And I'll come again in a month. You and I are getting married. Well, I gotta go. I gotta go see my friends again. Tell them I've decided to say goodbye to the single life. He was walking down a dusty road. Anastasia wasn't just walking home, she was flying on wings. Mom. She ran into the house and ran to her mother. I'm getting married. Nick Titov proposed to me. And fathers. Rosalie splashed her hands. Are you crazy? No, I won't let you. I won't let you marry him to spoil your fate. He's no good for you. Don't you get it? Tears came to Anastasia's eyes. I've loved Nick for a long time, since I was a little girl, she said. I never dreamed I'd be his wife. And if you forbid me to marry him, I'll leave home and you'll never see me again. I'll go to town with Nick and we'll get married there anyway. You'll be stuck with him all your life, Rosalie sighed. He's a fool. Can't you see that? I love him, she said, stomping her foot. And you can't stop me. What can I do with you? Rosalie sighed. You're just like your father, just as stubborn. Don't complain later, Anastasia. Complain about what? Anastasia was genuinely surprised. I'm going to have the happiest family because I'm marrying the man I love. Love. Rosalie grinned. You love him, but he loves you. Why did he suddenly decide to marry you? You've never met, never courted each other. He must have something to gain. No one's going to miss out, said Rosalie. There's something wrong with him. Mama, Nick is very good, said Anastasia, and twirled round her mother. Oh, I'm so happy. I'm going to tell Vivian about the wedding. Let her envy me. What can you do now? Rosalie resigned herself to it. Maybe it would work out for them. The wedding in the village was merry. The tables were set in the courtyard of the T-Dove's house, lavished with lavish whores, d'oeuvres, and alcohol. Anastasia sat at the head of the table next to Nick and smiled happily. And he seemed to pay no attention to his wife, only wrinkled and reluctantly kissed her when the guests shouted loudly, bitter. Oh, Anastasia. Vivian, who had been a bridesmaid, moved toward her. You're going to regret getting married. He doesn't look at you at all, as if you weren't his wife at all. He drinks moonshine with his friends and looks at other girls. He's not used to me yet, Anastasia defended her husband. Wait, we will live together, then he will not let me out of his sight. Until then, let him drink and have fun. It's a wedding, not a funeral. Then let's have a drink with you. Vivian handed her a glass of champagne. To love. And lots of kids. Oh, come on. Anastasia waved her hand and took a sip of champagne, but it went down the wrong throat. Tears came to her eyes. Would you say kids too? We can't think about them yet, and we have to get settled in the city first. Nick will soon get an apartment from the factory. You'll have to furnish it. You'll be a city girl. Vivian looked enviously at her friend. You'll forget the village altogether, she said. You know, probably even stop coming here. Don't be silly. Anastasia was angry. My mother is here, my sister, my nephews. How could I forget them? Nick and I will often come to help with the household chores. While Anastasia was talking to her friend, Nick got up from the table and went somewhere with friends, taking with him a bottle of moonshine. Noticing that the bride was almost crying, her mother-in-law came to her, took her by the hand and led her into the house. Let's go and rest, said Rosalie. You must be tired for the day. I've made a bed for you in the back room so that no one will disturb you. What about the guests? Anastasia looked around in confusion. Them Aunt Carla laughed. They've already forgotten about you. As long as there is moonshine and snacks on the table, and the bride and groom are not so important. Lie down and rest. Where's Nick? Anastasia sat on the bed and looked sadly at her mother-in-law. Kolka, don't wait, she sighed. Now, probably on the river with his friends drinking. He's like his father. I, too, waited for my husband all night after the wedding feast. I sat on the bed like you. I shed bitter tears. And then I didn't live a sweet life. Oh, she waved her hand. What to say now? Life is lived, not Washington. She waved again and left the room. Anastasia got out of bed and walked to the window, beyond which it was already dark. She could hear drunken voices. Someone belted out a song, and the disorderly voices backed it up. It's going to be different for me, Anastasia thought. She took off her white dress and placed it carefully on the table, then lay down on the bed, covered herself with the blanket and closed her eyes. She fell asleep immediately and woke up to someone piling on top of her. Anastasia screamed, but a wide palm covered her mouth. What are you yelling for? Are you going to wake up the whole house? She heard Nick's voice. Didn't you recognize your husband? He continued to pile on top of her. Don't. Anastasia tried to say, but she failed. Come on, Nick poked her with his breath. You're my wife now and you should know your duties. Or didn't your mother tell you anything about them?" He laughed. "Come on, do not break. Or I'll go find another woman for myself. There are plenty of them in the village. Who would not refuse a man's caress?" Anastasia obeyed in silence. Her lip was bleeding and she prayed to God that it would all be over quickly. In the morning, the guests gathered again in the Titov's yard. Anastasia no longer sat at the table, but as hostess, she brought the treats, washed the dishes, and watched Nick, who again had fun with his friends, forgetting that he had a young wife. And at night he was again pestering Anastasia, and she silently tolerated everything, only furtively wiping away her tears. A couple days later, Nick went into town for work. "I gotta go," he mumbled as he put on his shirt. "What about me?" Anastasia looked at her husband in bewilderment. "I have to pack. I have to quit my job. There's no reason for you to come with me now. I'll get an apartment, we'll get settled, and then I'll call you to me. And this. Give me your marriage license. I have to show them at work that I'm a married man now." "Nick, when are you coming to pick me up?" Anastasia was almost crying. We just got married. What will people say? He left his young wife at home and went to the city. But you do not listen to anyone. Nick counted the money and stuffed it into the inside pocket of his jacket. "I'll settle down and take you to the city. So tell all the curious people. Let them figure out the rest. Let me at least walk you to the bus." Anastasia jumped out of bed and started to get dressed. "I'll walk myself." Nick looked at her angrily. "And you help my mother. Don't be lazy." "Maybe I'll go to my house for a while," Anastasia suggested timidly. "I don't feel comfortable living here without you." "As you wish," Nick shrugged. "Okay, I gotta go. The bus won't wait." He didn't kiss his wife goodbye. Nick walked out the door and walked briskly to the gate. Anastasia hoped he would turn around and wave at her, but Nick didn't even look back. She cried a little, and then gathered up all her things and went back to her mother's house. "What have you done?" Rosalie shook her hands when she saw her daughter. "Mom, stop it," Anastasia cut her off. "Nick went to the city alone to get an apartment," Anastasia said. "As soon as he's settled, he'll come and get me, and we'll leave." Yeah, Rosalie said, her thin lips tightening. "Words and words go here and there, but deeds go nowhere. Well, I've been married, so maybe I'm happy now. We'll live like we used to. If Nick wanted you, he'd have taken you with him instead of embarrassing you in front of people." "Nick will come for me," Anastasia said, resenting her mother. "And if I'm bothering you, I can go back to my mother-in-law's. It's my house there now, too." "Live already," Rosalie sighed. "If you're back, we'll see." A week passed, another week, another month, and there was no word from Nick. Anastasia ran to the mailbox every day, hoping to see a letter from him. But she found nothing in the mailbox except the newspaper her mother had written. From acquaintances, she learned that Nick has already received an apartment, in which he now lives alone, and he doesn't even think of coming to the village. "If that's the case, I'll go to him myself," she told her mother at breakfast. "I'll get the address and then I'll go." "Go?" Rosalie shrugged. "It doesn't seem very human. You're here and your husband's in town. I don't know what he's doing there." She put the food on her daughter's plate. Anastasia picked up a fork and picked up a piece of scrambled egg, but suddenly she turned pale and ran out into the yard, clamping her mouth shut. I see Rosalie sighed as Anastasia returned to the table. "Now I guess I'll have to go into town to deal with your man." "Mom, what are you talking about?" Anastasia looked at her in surprise. "You're pregnant, that's what." Rosalie shook her head. "It's no big deal. There was no sorrow. Well, it can't be helped now. I won't let you disgrace yourself. She tied a kerchief on her head, went outside, and headed for the Titov's house. Anastasia, did you fall asleep while playing Six in the Sun? Anastasia opened her eyes and saw Nelly holding a birch broom. No, Anastasia stretched. I remembered my life, how I had married a penny, how I had moved to the city to live with him. If it hadn't been for my mother, I would have been alone with my daughter in my arms. Our mother was a brave woman, Nelly smiled. She's remembered fondly. She never told me what she said to your Nick when she found him in town, but he came to the village like a sweetheart and took you with him. But she was very worried about you. She felt in her motherly heart that you weren't living well with your husband. How many times I told her not to tear her heart out. Did she listen to anyone? At least you didn't say anything when you came to visit, but kept quiet. What kind of husband and father would Nick make? What else could I say? Anastasia lowered her eyes. It was my own fault for not listening to my mother and marrying him. I've been tormented all my life. Now she cried out. All right, enough of this damp. Nelly rubbed her lower back. Go and collect the laundry while I make a broom for the bath. It's good for you, okay? You'll forget all your sorrows in no time when you take a broom bath. They say a broom is worth more than money in a bathhouse. Having undressed in the anteroom, Anastasia went into the steam room and squeezed her eyes shut with pleasure. It was really good and smelled of tar. She poured hot water into a basin and diluted it with cold water, pouring it generously from the ladle. Then she put the boiling water on the stone and, steaming with the broom, began to whip herself on her back and sides, saying, as her mother Rosalie had once said, gula on the back, that they may run away, gula on the legs, so that they run along the paths, gula on the shoulders so you can sleep at night. Anastasia doused herself with cool water and went into the anteroom to catch her breath. Then she went back into the steam room to wash herself properly. When she returned home after the bath, she laid down on the bed with her arms spread out. Oh, it feels so good, she said with ease, as if she had been born again. I left some compote in a cup for you on the table, said Nelly, taking the clean linen. I'll go and wash off the dirt and fatigue. Our mother used to say that scented steam not only heals the body but also the soul. Not your city baths, which are of little use. While Nelly washed in the bath, Anastasia even took a nap, woken by the slamming of the front door. Rested, she made her way to her room. A flushed Nelly walked in. I'll be right back, and then we'll sit down to dinner. At dinner, the sisters drank a shot or two of moonshine, snacking on salted meat that lay appetizingly on the plate. Maybe he'll change his mind about getting a divorce. Nelly waved her hands again. What do you have to divide now? We've lived and lived. Soon you'll have grandchildren. Will there be a sense in life? It won't, Anastasia said. I'm tired, Nelly. I'm exhausted. I haven't bumped into the back of a chair. I've loved my Nick for so many years, and now suddenly I'm tired. What happened? Nothing much happened, Anastasia sighed. It's been building up for years. I'd reached the end of my patience. He quit 6 months ago, didn't he? Nelly looked at her sister in surprise. You said he'd never had a drop in his mouth. How much did he drink before that? Anastasia grinned. As long as I can remember, he drank as much as he did. As if you hadn't noticed. Nelly got up from the table and began to collect the dishes. When you married Nick, your mother and I told you he was following in his father's footsteps, but you wouldn't even listen to us. I thought he'd change with me. Anastasia looked sadly out the window. I thought that if I surrounded him with love and care, he'd forget about drinking. Only the hunchback can be fixed by the grave. Nelly said with a sneer, and your colleague will not even help. Why didn't you divorce and leave Nick right away? If life with him didn't work out, you had a place to go back to. My mom was still alive. And after she died, they didn't sell the house right away, she sighed. It was a shame to go back. And Nick loved my daughter. I couldn't deprive her of her own father. When he was sober, he was happy to take her for walks and bring her goodies. And when she went to school, he could help her with her homework. By that time, we already had a one-bedroom apartment, and we sold the house with you parents, and the money was divided. So I used the money to furnish the apartment. It's a sight to behold. I couldn't just leave it and go anywhere. It was a pity. Don't you feel sorry for your life? Nayli sat down at the table across from her sister again. I worked hard, from morning till night in the canteen to earn an extra penny. Kolya, where did they transfer your son because of his drunkenness to different laborers? He didn't last long there either. You had to carry everything on your shoulders to support your family. At least you could carry some food home from the canteen. You're right, Anastasia sighed. My older co-workers pitied me. They'd put butter in my bag, or a piece of meat, or fruit for my daughter. Nick was drinking most of his paycheck, so I had to cut back on everything. Thanks, Nayli. You helped me by sending me a sack of potatoes, onions, pickles, homemade eggs. That's how we survived. I kept hoping that Nick would improve, get a job, and we'd live like human beings. But alas, Anastasia waved her hands. All my hopes were dashed. When my daughter lived with us, Nick and I still had something in common. And when she went to college and moved to another city, that's when I realized we were strangers. Before that, it was like I didn't notice anything. It was like there was a veil over my eyes. I forgave him for scandals, drunkenness, insults, the eternal lack of money. He even tried to raise his hand against me, but I couldn't stand it. I remember I grabbed a knife from the table, which I used to cut cabbage. Anastasia continued. And how God kept me from sinning, I don't know. But Nick got scared, and from then on he only insulted me with words. You poor, poor thing. Nayli came to her sister and put her arm around her shoulders. All these years you've put up with it, and you haven't told me much. You had enough problems of your own, didn't you? Anastasia waved her hand. I buried a tyrant husband. My son started fooling around. Good thing he came to his senses in time, and I'm still here with my complaints. I put up with it. Somehow I kept hoping for the best. So what's changed? Nayli repeated her question. I've changed. Anastasia ran a hand through her hair. Since I got the other job, I've changed. I didn't notice anything before. Work, home, work. And I had the worst job in the world. I was running around like a squirrel in a wheel. I would get up early, then spend the whole day at the hot stove with smoking pots. And in the evening I could barely get home from fatigue. She'd go back to the stove. I had to cook dinner. And as I got a job in a pastry shop, which opened not far from home, and more free time appeared. And I looked at my colleagues, girls young, well-groomed, with arrows and hairstyles, and I am among them, like an old woman of 100 years. I felt ashamed. I started to earn more money and save it. I used to spend everything on groceries to feed my family better, but he got so brazen that he turned his face away from my food. He said it wasn't good. You could overdo it for your own husband. I was upset by such words and tried even harder to cook something delicious. One day I cooked a chicken, which turned out so brown with a delicious flavor. Nick, as usual, put a chicken leg on his plate and ate a little. Then he put the second one on his plate, took a little bite from different sides and pushed the plate away, saying he was full, but there was a lot of chicken meat left on the bones. When I saw that, I even cried. I always liked to eat chicken leg, but I rarely got it. I used to save it for my husband or my daughter. And I used to eat white meat, which I've hated all my life, Anastasia continued. So I started saving money, and I bought dumplings or put pasta and cutlets on the table. Nick threw the plates on the floor at first. But eventually he realized that I wasn't going to indulge him anymore. He ate every last crumb, going days without dinner. And I slowly renewed my closet, got rid of old clothes, and 3 years ago for the first time went to the sea with a colleague who went there every year. Can you imagine? Nearly, for the first time in so many years, I saw the sea so warm and gentle. On vacation, I enjoyed everything like a child, and I did not care that we rented some shed where there were only 2 beds with iron nets and sold mattresses. And all the amenities were in the yard. I then the whole year lived the memories of this vacation, and the next year again went to the south, having saved money for tickets. Oh, how Nick called me names before the trip. But I did not care. It was at the resort I felt like a woman, which men can still pay attention to. It was like I spread my wings and even had a little resort romance with no strings attached. Are you planning to go to your resort this year? Nearly grinned. I see you enjoyed it, didn't you? I did. Anastasia nodded her head. I liked feeling like a human being instead of a maid and a housekeeper. Well, it's time for bed. Nearly looked at her watch. I wish you were leaving tomorrow. I'd have stayed a little longer. They wouldn't understand at work, Anastasia said with a smile. The next day, Nearly walked her sister to the bus. You should think again before you make a decision, she said, hugging Anastasia goodbye. It's easy to tear things down, but it's hard to put them back together again. Anastasia nodded silently and walked up the steps to the bus. As she entered the apartment, she nearly tripped over her scattered shoes. Was it really that hard to clean up after yourself? Anastasia grumbled, putting her husband's shoes on the shelf. Nick walked out into the hallway, glaring angrily at his wife. Have you had enough of Dan Holm? Leave me alone, Anastasia shrugged him off. You'd better help me unpack my bags. Nearly's brought her presents, and she seems embarrassed. Is she trying to drag her own sister into her dirty business? Or did she lose her shame and show up with her boyfriend? Anastasia didn't listen to him anymore and went into the kitchen. It was the same as usual when she was away from home. The table was covered in grease stains. The sink was full of dirty dishes, bread crumbs on the floor. It was so hard to clean up after yourself. Anastasia grumbled as she put on her apron. I didn't get married to wash dishes and scrub floors. Nick replied defiantly, that's what women are for. And what are men for? To lie on the couch and scold their wives. Anastasia was silent, gathering her courage. Let's get a divorce. We've been strangers for a long time. Why should we torture each other? Why don't we? Nick answered immediately. I have no doubt in my mind that you'll never do it. Maybe I'm sick of it too. How do you feel about me? I'll find myself a young hottie, and you'll learn how to live without a man. That's the deal, Anastasia exhaled with relief as she began to clean up. We'll split the apartment, and we'll each get our own lives. And I'll finally have an orderly kitchen, not a pigsty like this. Nick looked at his wife resentfully but said nothing. He went to his room and didn't come out until the evening, and when he got hungry, he came to the kitchen and was surprised to find that Anastasia had not cooked anything. Had you forgotten your duties? He literally burst into her room. Do I have to go hungry? Have you forgotten that you and I are getting a divorce? Anastasia didn't even look at him, continuing to flip through the magazine. Learn to live on your own. Cook your own food now. And you're going to wash your own clothes too, by the way. I'm done working for you, Anastasia said. Oh yes, I'm sorry, I forgot that you're divorcing me, Nick said ironically. Good luck. He forcefully slammed the door to the room. Anastasia heard her husband slam the refrigerator door, swearing. Then something rattled and fell, but she didn't even go out to see what he'd dropped. Anastasia went to work in the morning, and on her lunch break, She went to file the divorce papers. She filled out the necessary application, stating in it the reason didn't agree on the characters. The court clerk's office accepted her application and marked it, and said they would send her a notice by mail when she would have to appear in court for a preliminary hearing. When she got home that evening, Anastasia went into the kitchen, poured herself some tea, and made a sandwich. She didn't feel like eating. Out of habit, she pulled a pot out of the cupboard to make dinner, but then suddenly laughed and put the pot back. She went into her room, turned on the TV, lay down on her bed, and closed her eyes. On the TV, a man and a woman were first figuring out their relationship, and then vigorously declaring their love for each other. Anastasia turned off the TV, covered herself with a blanket, and fell asleep until the morning. She didn't hear Nick rattling the dishes in the kitchen, making his own dumplings, and even washing his own plate, which had never happened before. 2 weeks later, Anastasia handed him a subpoena she'd pulled out of the mailbox. "What's this?" Nick stared at it, looking at the paper. A summons. Anastasia shrugged. "We have to appear in court the day after tomorrow. We're going to go to court the day after tomorrow to get a divorce." What he yelled. "You weren't kidding, were you?" "No," the wife replied calmly. "And I also chose a few options for the exchange of our apartment. We'll have to pay extra, of course, but we can live separately." "I'm not going anywhere." Nick threw aside the summons. "I thought you were joking to scare me." "So you're serious about breaking up with me?" Nick asked. "We lived together for so many years. We raised our daughter, and now you've decided to start a new life. I knew you'd found a man." "You're a fool, Nick." Anastasia sighed. "Do you have only one thing on your mind? That I'm cheating on you? Are you judging me by yourself? I'll divorce you even if you don't show up in court. We have an adult daughter and no other children. So you and I will be divorced like sweethearts." Nick looked pitifully at his wife. "What are you thinking? We had a good life. Yes, I hurt you a little, but you forgive me, and we'll live like before. We're not in our 20s. We don't know how many years we have left. What do we have to share in our old age? What good things have I seen with you?" Anastasia turned to Nick. "Other people are vacationing together at resorts, shopping together. Husbands help their wives with chores. Where have you and I traveled together besides the village? We've never been anywhere else. You've never taken me to a restaurant or a cafe. You've never given me a single flower in our whole life together. And I've never seen a present from you on my birthday or New Year's Eve. You've only given me scandals on those days. Probably on purpose, so I wouldn't think about presents and flowers. When my sister and I sold my parents' house, I wanted to buy a fur coat with the proceeds. I bought you a car because you've been wanting one for a long time. Even though it's old, it's your own. You call that a normal life?" "Amelia, I'll make it up to you," Nick babbled. "I'll shower you with flowers." "You've come to your senses," Anastasia grinned. And he called her Amelia. "It's always Anastasia and Anastasia." "No, Nick, it's too late. I don't love you anymore. I used to, but now I don't." Nick lowered his head, turned around, and went to his room. After returning from court, Nick went back into his room and sat on the couch with his arms around his head. He remembered the judge's words over and over again. "I give you 2 months to reconcile. If at the second hearing you, the defendant, still do not agree to the divorce, you may be divorced without your consent." For the second time in his life, Nick was very scared. The first time was a long time ago, back in the army, when Andrew had been killed and the investigation into the case had begun. But now, when Anastasia decided to break up with him, there in court, Nick looked at his wife with different eyes. He suddenly saw the tired expression on her face, the cross lines on her forehead, the drooping corners of her lips, and he felt unbearably sorry for Anastasia. There was no one closer to him. He suddenly wanted to hug his wife, to hold her close, to confess his love to her for the first time. And he also realized that he would be lost without his ear, sink to the bottom, get drunk and die under some fence. All these years she had taken care of him, nursed him back to health after another binge. Yes, she'd swear, yell, get angry, but she'd never leave him in the lurch. And Rose's daughter? How will she react to her parents' divorce? Will she want to stay in touch with her father? Something had to be done. Nick got up from the couch and went to the window. But what? Would Anastasia believe his sincere remorse and take back the statement? The next day, when Anastasia got off work, she was surprised to see Nick standing by the car. "What are you doing here?" she asked, walking up to him. "Did something happen?" 3. "I was driving by and decided to pick you up to take you home." He was obviously embarrassed. "Maybe I need to stop at a store or something." "You tell me. You don't have to carry all the heavy stuff yourself." "You used to ignore the heavy grocery bags I used to bring home, and then my arms would get sore." Anastasia grinned. "Okay, let's go home. I've been on my feet all day." Yeah, and she opened the front door and saw a small bouquet of flowers on the seat. Who were these for? Anastasia wondered again. "What's the occasion?" "They're for you." Nick was a little offended. "You said I never gave flowers. I decided to buy some, and you're not happy again." "Oh, it's too late for that." Anastasia sighed, sitting down on the seat. "Still with you, even if you pick me up every day after work. I need to give flowers." Nick didn't say anything, turned the key in the ignition, and slowly pulled away. Anastasia sat next to him, holding a bouquet of flowers, and smiled. The next day in the evening, Rose's daughter walked in on them. "Dad, Mom, I have some news for you," she said, sitting down in her chair. "I don't know whether it will make you happy or sad." "We have news for you too," Anastasia said seriously, and Nick looked at her reproachfully. "Come on, tell us what's happened to you." "Well," laughed Rose, "you're going to be grandparents soon." "Really?" Anastasia came up to her daughter and hugged her. "I'm so happy. Nick, do you hear me?" She turned to her husband. "We're going to be grandparents. Will we have a grandson or granddaughter?" "I don't know," Rose shrugged. "We haven't had an ultrasound yet. It's scheduled for next week. Then we'll know the sex of the baby. What's your news?" Nick looked pleadingly at Anastasia, and she answered with a wave of her hand. "It's nothing much. I'd forgotten about it." When Rose left, Nick approached his wife. "So we have lived to grandchildren." He put his arm around her shoulders. "You know, I was thinking about the fishing trips we used to take when Rose was a teenager. Why don't we go to the lake this weekend? I'll fish, and you can relax in the fresh air, buy some meat, barbecue." "Why?" Anastasia jumped at the idea. "All right, let's go. I'll make sandwiches, and we'll get some tea in a thermos," Anastasia said. "I want to wander around the grove near the lake and listen to the birds singing." "So we'll go on Saturday," said Nick. "I'll get my fishing rods ready. I think I saw them in the pantry. It's been a long time since I've been fishing." Nick was worried that Anastasia would change her mind about going with him. But on Saturday, she woke up early and got ready for the trip. When Nick came out of his room, she had everything ready, sandwiches and tea in a thermos. She even fried cutlets, boiled eggs and sausages. Out in nature, you always work up an appetite. The fish have already waited for you, and you still sleep and sleep. She teased her husband. "We'll be left without a catch." "We won't." Nick grumbled good-naturedly and began to dress quickly. It took them about 40 minutes to get to the lake. All the way they were silent, there was nothing to talk about. While Nick was sorting out the rods and other gear, Anastasia spread a blanket on the grass, laid out the food, and called her husband to breakfast. They ate in silence, listening to the grasshoppers chirping and the bees buzzing nearby. I'm going fishing, Nick said, rising from the blanket and heading for the lake, while Anastasia put the groceries back in her bag. After standing beside her husband for a while, she walked toward the grove. How good it felt. She spread her arms. What grace. They walked back in silence, listening to music on the radio. "Shall I fry some fish?" Nick asked, satisfied. "I'll clean and fry it myself." "Where would I go?" replied Anastasia, getting out of the car. "We'll boil some more potatoes. We'll have a proper dinner." After dinner, Anastasia sat in her room watching TV. Suddenly she heard a phrase that made her think. Always give people a second chance, but never a third. Could it really be that Nick will change now, Anastasia thought. She walked over to the window. He's been courting me, even giving me flowers. And how can I tell my daughter about the divorce? Now, when she's expecting a baby. It's a shame to part with the apartment. So much work has gone into it. It's a lot of work, Anastasia thought. And what's to hide? I still love Nick, even though of course he doesn't deserve it. But as they say, love is evil, you'll fall in love. She moved away from the window and lay down on the bed. In the morning, entering the kitchen, Anastasia saw her husband standing at the stove, cooking something. "Oh, you're awake?" He was happy, sitting down at the table. "I fried some eggs. True, a little burned. If you want, I'll quickly make new ones." No, Anastasia waved her hands. "It's fine, it's even better." Nick sat down across from her. "How about you and I go to the movies or take a walk in the park? The last time we were there was about 5 or 6 years ago. Do you remember?" Yeah, Anastasia nodded. "You went on all the rides, even though you were hungover that day. And after you got out of the centrifuge, you fell on the grass and lay there for half an hour. I thought you were about to die. I even wanted to call an ambulance." "Yeah, I did," Nick grinned. "Oh, how much time I missed because of drinking. And how could you put up with me all this time?" I was wondering the same thing. Anastasia got up from the table. "Why didn't you think of that before?" "I was a fool," Nick looked at her guiltily. "Listen, maybe you'll change your mind about the divorce. How many years have we been together? We'll be grandparents soon. What do we have to share? Old age is around the corner. It's better to face it together than alone. And I'll be lost without you." He sighed heavily. "I did not sleep all night today," All thought. "I love you, Anastasia. Believe it or not, I can't imagine life without you. Sure, I behaved like an asshole to you, but we had some good times when Rose was born, and I used to get up at night so you'd get some sleep. Remember when we used to redecorate and pick out wallpaper together?" Anastasia said. "Oddly enough, we liked the same ones. Do you remember when we went to the village for your niece's wedding? And you and I had no place to sleep because there were so many guests, so we climbed into the hayloft?" "Come on," she said indignantly. "You've got something to bring up. I decided to go shopping today, to look at the baby's dowry. Before you know it, he'll be born. So maybe I should come with you," Nick suggested with obvious reluctance. He didn't like shopping. "You should fix the faucet in the kitchen. And the shelf in the bathroom is about to fall down," Anastasia said, grabbed her bag and went out into the hallway. "I'll do it," Nick fussed. "Just hurry back." Anastasia walked down the street, shaking off the bright sun. Young mothers came across her, rolling strollers with sleeping babies in front of them. "Soon Rose will be strolling down the alley like that," she smiled. "And maybe I'll walk with the baby too, remembering how I used to walk with my daughter." She stopped to admire the little kids playing in the sandbox. They were so funny, they were enthusiastically making sandpits. "Roman, it's time to go home." She heard a man's voice nearby. "Let's go, or grandmother will scold." "Right away, Grandpa." A boy about 4 years old climbed out of the sandbox and headed toward a man standing not far from Anastasia. Grandpa? Grandma, she smiled, listening to the sound of those words. How time flies. It was only recently that we ourselves were running barefoot through the village, swimming in the pond, making plans for the future. And very soon I'll be a grandmother. Maybe Nick's right, we shouldn't get divorced, Anastasia wondered. He really would be lost without me. Nick hasn't been looking well lately. He's in pain, he won't tell me, but he keeps grabbing his right side, and he's been complaining of high blood pressure. I'd never forgive myself if something happened to him. I'll take my statement out of the courtroom tomorrow, Anastasia decided. But I won't tell Nick anything about it. Let him think I'm still determined. Maybe we really can have the human life I once dreamed of. She sighed with relief, as if a heavy weight had been lifted from her shoulders, and strode lightly toward the children's store. And the next day in the evening, Rose and her husband Helium came to visit her mother and father and told them that a girl would be born, whom they decided to name Annie. Time passed, and Nick anxiously awaited the second summons. When he and Anastasia could be divorced for good, he didn't know that his wife had taken out a petition for dissolution of marriage, so there was nothing to fear. Anastasia, I've been thinking, he told his wife. Why don't we go on a vacation? You and I have never been anywhere together. And where will we get the money from? Anastasia looked at him in surprise. It's not cheap. Well, I've put some money aside. He pulled some money out of his pocket. I'll get my vacation money, and if I need it, I'll borrow it from someone. We'll go wild. I found out it's cheaper, and we can find a place to stay on the spot. Do you agree? I don't know, Anastasia said uncertainly. You should think about your health. You've been complaining about stomachaches and nausea lately. When we get back from vacation, I'll go to the doctor, Nick promised. Or maybe I just need a vacation, and then everything will be fine. Shall we go? Let's go, Anastasia waved her hand. We don't know when we'll get away next time. When my granddaughter is born, I won't have time to travel. I'll have to help my parents. That's great, rejoiced Nick. But I have a favor to ask you. He was silent for a while. Let's go on vacation by plane. I realize that it's expensive, but I'm embarrassed to admit. I've never been on an airplane, and I'd really like to try it, Nick said. I've only flown once, the year before last, and I'm afraid to go again. Anastasia looked at her husband with fear. Do not be afraid of anything, Nick reassured her. I will hold your hand the whole flight. At the airport, they were a little confused, not knowing which way to go, until they heard the announcer's voice inviting them to check in for their flight at counter number 4. Once seated, Nick immediately fastened his seatbelt and stared out the window, waiting for the plane to start moving. The flight was only supposed to last a couple hours, but Nick was gripped with panic from the first few minutes and his hands began to shake. He gripped the arms of the seat and closed his eyes. Feeling the plane begin to gain altitude, Nick opened one eye. He looked out the porthole and saw that they were flying above the clouds, and now he was overcome with a feeling of elation. The airplane had gained altitude. The passengers became animated, and some even began to unbuckle their seatbelts and get up from their seats to go to the restroom. Nick was still sitting in his seat, looking around curiously. The food arrived, and he was again surprised to find that the airplane had food. After lunch, he began to fall asleep. He closed his eyes and fell asleep. Nick woke up only when a pretty stewardess announced landing. The plane began to descend. Again, there was an amplified noise. Nick grabbed Anastasia's hand, who laughed. Well, who promised to hold whose hand? The plane landed safely, and Nick breathed a sigh of relief. It's a good thing we'll be traveling back by train. Nick and Anastasia settled in a private house in a room that barely fit the two of them. Every day they went to the beach, swimming in the warm sea, sunbathing on the hot sand, and in the evening they wandered the streets, listening to the music coming from the sidewalk cafes. Anastasia noticed that despite the vacation, her husband was somehow sad, and one day she asked him about it. You see, Anastasia, Nick replied. I've just realized that I've lived most of my life for nothing. I could have seen the whole world with you. But instead, I've prioritized the bottle, forgetting about everything in the world about you. I only cared about my drinking buddies, who were not really my friends at all. It's good that you realize that. Anastasia gently stroked her husband's arm. You and I have everything ahead of us now. We will work, save money for new trips. And maybe we'll buy a cottage? After all, when the granddaughter is born, she will need fresh air. Yeah, Nick seized on the idea. I'll build a gazebo, we'll drink tea and talk in the evenings. And we'll put a bathhouse and a swimming pool next to it. I've seen inflatable ones for sale at the store. Oh, we'll live with you. Just take this divorce papers with you. Or we'll have to remarry again. Hadn't you noticed that the deadline had passed and no summonses had come? Anastasia grinned. I thought you had figured it out a long time ago. Were you thinking about divorcing me? Nick jumped up happily from the bench, sighing and clutching his right side. That's it. When we get home, we'll go straight to the doctor. Anastasia helped her husband back to the bench. In case you have something serious, and the main thing is to start treatment in time. A couple of days later, they returned from vacation, and Anastasia made an appointment for her husband to see a general practitioner. An elderly man in a white coat listened to Nick attentively and gave him a referral for tests. On his second visit to the therapist, Nick received a referral for an ultrasound of the abdominal cavity and additional biochemical tests. Doctor, what do you think my husband has? Anastasia asked with concern. It's too early to say. The therapist scrutinized Nick's tests. But I can assume that your husband has cirrhosis, given his previous lifestyle, and the symptoms confirm it. Now you have to prepare for my funeral, Nick said irritably, when they left the clinic. Don't be sad for long, you're buried. Get married right away. Why should you live alone? Nick said with a bitter grin. Anastasia did not answer anything, understanding the mood of her husband. Coffin me, choose me inexpensive. There is nothing to spend, anyway we'll rot in the ground. And don't you dare dress me up in a suit. I can't stand these jackets and ties. Put me in a blue shirt and a gray sweater, my favorite. Then I'll look so handsome for sure. Stop talking nonsense. Anastasia couldn't take it anymore. Why are you burying yourself alive? We'll treat it as the doctor says. If necessary, we'll agree to surgery. And you'll be as good as new. And when the time comes, you'll die your own death. But that won't be for a while. Maybe I should go to church, do some penance. Nick suddenly suggested it. God will absolve me of my sins. Maybe I'll get better. How many sins do you have? Anastasia asked wryly. I think I know all your sins. Maybe you're hiding something else from me. I have one big sin, Nick lowered his head. But I can't tell you about it yet. I'll confess it when the time comes. Or maybe I'll take this secret with me to the grave. While they waited for the results of additional tests, Anastasia watched her husband. His appetite was gone, his sleep was disturbed, and he became nervous and irritable. As before, he was angry with his wife and dissatisfied with everything. Maybe I shouldn't have taken the application. Anastasia thought, we would have been divorced by now, and I wouldn't have heard those angry words. When it was time to go to the hospital again, Nick flatly refused. Go on your own, he said sharply to his wife. It was you who forced me to take stupid tests and examinations. I had nothing else to do. I had to go to the clinic alone. Anastasia knocked on the door and cautiously looked into the doctor's office. Ah, Titova recognized. Well, come in, said the doctor. I've come alone. Anastasia crossed the threshold. My husband isn't feeling well. Well, tell me how things are going. The doctor paced the room. "Perhaps it's better that you came alone," he said, stopping in front of Anastasia. "I have nothing to comfort you. The tests show that your husband has terminal liver cancer that has metastasized to other organs." "Is it incurable?" Anastasia asked the question and realized the stupidity of it. Couldn't we do surgery or something else? Could chemotherapy be administered? The doctor thought for a moment. "You could try, but I don't think it would help anymore. Although, you need to take some more tests to be sure that your body can withstand chemotherapy. Here's a referral to an oncologist for tests. He'll explain everything you need to do next." Anastasia walked home slowly, tears in her eyes and the doctor's voice in her ears. 3 to 6 months. When she returned, she walked into Nick's room and saw him sleeping with his legs tucked under him. Maybe it will still turn out okay, she watched her husband's face. As if he sensed her gaze, he opened his eyes. Seeing his wife, with difficulty he got up and sat down on the sofa. How has he lost weight? Anastasia thought. Only recently we went to a resort. He looked good, even had a little tummy. Now it's so that all his clothes are hanging out. What did your doctor say? Nick asked with a grin. He'll live, Anastasia answered hastily. I just need to take some tests for treatment. We'll go with you tomorrow. I'm not going anywhere, Nick shook his head. I'll live as long as fate gives me. I don't need to poison my body with chemistry. How did he know about the chemo? Does he really know he has cancer? Anastasia was scared. You'll get better if you follow the doctor's recommendations, she insisted. You still have to get treatment. I won't, Nick repeated capriciously. Drink your own pills, maybe it's better for you. Maybe you'll become calmer and they'll let you go. Become as you wish, Anastasia said tiredly. I can't change your mind. The next day, Anastasia went to the oncologist and told him that her husband, Nick, didn't want to take any medication, and she hadn't even told him about the chemotherapy. I'll tell you what the doctor said when asked if Nick had any chance of recovery. A lot in treatment depends on the patient himself, on his willpower and will to live. Sometimes hopelessly ill patients literally cling to life and live for another 10 years, and the other may die of a cold or cut his finger. If your husband does not want to fight, then medicine is powerless here. So just be close to your husband, help him. Support him with painkillers, which I will now prescribe you. That's all you can do to help him. Once again, after leaving the hospital, Anastasia walked slowly down the street and couldn't believe that Nick might be leaving this world very soon. The phone rang and she saw on the display that it was her daughter calling. Mommy, how are you and Daddy doing? She asked cheerfully. Helium and I want to come over and visit you today. Oh, Rose, how can you show up? Anastasia tried to answer. Daddy's a little sick. Don't worry, it's nothing. He got a virus somewhere. I'm afraid I might catch it from him. When he gets better, we'll come to you. You need to take care now. You're about to give birth, so you mustn't get sick. Anastasia said goodbye to her daughter. She walked slowly down the street again. She didn't want to tell Rose that her father was seriously ill. When she had the baby, then she would know everything. In the meantime, let her remain in ignorance. Her husband's temper had changed for the worse again. He became cranky, angry, irritable again. When he was in pain, he would throw a pillow at Anastasia as if she were to blame for his suffering. Anastasia put up with his antics, making liquid porridge and spoon-feeding him. When he stopped rising from the couch, she massaged him to avoid bed sores and changed his underwear. Nick grew weaker every day. He could no longer turn over on his own. His speech became slow and at times slurred. He moaned and gritted his teeth in pain. And in his delirium, he kept saying, Andrew, take me away, Andrew. 3 days before Nick died, Rose gave birth to a daughter, and Anastasia, sitting beside her husband, through her tears, said, Well, you've lived to see your granddaughter. Now get well. Annie needs a grandfather. You'll tell her stories and ride her on your back." But Nick didn't understand anything anymore. And just before he died, he looked at Anastasia with clear eyes and slowly said, "God punished me for Andrew. He was killed because of me. I should have been in his place." "What are you saying?" Anastasia screamed. But Nick didn't hear her anymore. After Nick's funeral, Anastasia was afraid to go into the empty apartment, where no one was waiting for her. In the evening, she wandered the streets for long periods of time, pondering her husband's last words, that her brother Andrew had died because of him. Now she would never know how it had really happened. And did she really need to know? After all, it had been so many years. On weekends, Anastasia visited her daughter and son-in-law to babysit Annie's granddaughter. Rose at first reproached her mother for hiding her father's illness from her. But Anastasia managed to convince her that pregnant women do not need negative emotions to bear a healthy child. After the death of her husband, life for Anastasia seemed to stop. Only her granddaughter, who had recently been born, gave her meaning. She blamed herself for once deciding to file for divorce from Nick. Maybe that was the reason for the rapid development of his illness due to mental distress. Although, as the doctor claimed, the development of the tumor began 2 years ago and was mostly asymptomatic. As time passed, the heartache gradually subsided, leaving only memories. Once Anastasia heard a song performed by a famous artist, and the words fell into her soul. "Before, I did not listen to my mother. I lived everything with my own mind. Everything seemed to know better. I stood my ground and satisfied with myself, quite everything Anastasia thought. I didn't believe that if my sweetheart said something to me, it meant it was all right. But it's true," she reflected. "I didn't listen to my mom once. She said I shouldn't marry Nick. I wouldn't be happy with him. I loved him dearly and thought that thanks to my love he would change and we would live well and long. Alas, that didn't happen. But I am sure that all good things are still ahead of me." After learning that her husband had a mistress, the wife did not make a fuss, but did something different. They'd been estranged for a long time. Not anymore. Bridget went to live with her boyfriend, and they were left alone in a huge house, where each could get lost and not see the other. They didn't talk to each other for days at a time, not because they were fighting, but because they were strangers. For 22 years of life together, they never became close. On the contrary, with each passing year, they grew farther and farther apart. Of course, they could have broken up a long time ago, but something kept them apart, especially in the mornings. Ajay couldn't see Olivia sleeping. It was a good thing it was dark at night, and he couldn't see her in her sleep with her mouth open, breathing loudly, sometimes even snoring. How ugly is she when she sleeps? Ugly to the point of nausea. But when she woke up first, she was not one iota more beautiful. EJ knew in advance that when he showered, he would go into the kitchen and see her sloppy, in a hastily thrown-on robe, her hair disheveled, bunched up and tied with a rubber band, her cigarette in her hands, and a mug of coffee. Not a cup, but a mug. "Can we not smoke in the kitchen?" Ajay will ask again. Or he won't say anything at all, and won't even look in her direction. "Where should I smoke?" Olivia asks. And he won't answer her question. He just doesn't want a morning argument that will wear out his nerves and ruin his mood. Ajay had a quick breakfast and left for work. He had to be there by 8, Olivia by 9. It used to be that when Bridget lived with them, her daughter or Ajay would make breakfast. The two of them would eat breakfast together, and there would be a semblance of family. Now even that was gone. The dead house had finally died with Bridget gone. At night, Olivia made attempts to get closer to Ajay, at least physically. And there, lo and behold, she'd crawl under her husband's blanket, put her arms around him, kiss his shoulder, and try to grope his flesh. Donna J brushes her hand away. Everything is calm in Baghdad. Olivia laughs angrily. You impotent wretch. You think I don't know you only get it up for your mistresses? I hate you. Let's get a divorce, Ajay once again suggests. No way. No way. You'll thank me that I didn't want to divorce you, divide the house, divide the property. And this is when we have everything. Live and be happy. Somehow there's no joy. There's nothing to be happy about, Olivia. And you need to finally realize that. I've been ready for a divorce for a long time. I don't want to fight, Ajay interrupts. I want things to be peaceful so that Bridget can. Shut up. We're going to have grandchildren any day now. And what? You and me? They'll come separately to the cramped apartments we can afford after we divide the property. I wanted to live a selfish life for myself. You were and you still are. You know, the time will come when you won't be able to stop me. Divorce is imminent. It hasn't come yet. What's keeping you? Bridget. I want an amicable divorce. Bridget and Virginia, Ajay thought and smiled. If Virginia agreed, he would have divorced Olivia long ago. It was a good thing Olivia hadn't seen him smile, or there would have been a scandal. She hated it when he smiled, thinking he was thinking about his mistress, and she wasn't wrong. Not about a mistress, but about the one and only one he loved, and he didn't need any others. Virginia, hello, my love. I miss you as much as Danielle. Vacation. Freedom. Daniel's doing great. Only 1B in English. He's going to Grandma's after tomorrow. So you're free, and I'm free. Olivia left for her mother's yesterday. Will you come over? Can you make it? Ajay wrote. Well, I don't know, Virginia smiled to herself. You know what would agree? How many years have they been dating? And she always goes to Ajay's place like it's a first date. It's about time they got used to each other for so many years. It's even time to get used to each other. But no, it's not working out for either Virginia or Ajay. Virginia, I miss you. Come to my place, come on, I'll be waiting for you, said Ajay. You don't have to meet me, it will attract attention. I'm tired of hiding and I don't want that. I'll meet you at 6:30 outside your office. And that's it, he insisted. Come on, you're driving me away. If I wait for you, I'll pass you by, Virginia objected. I'm not kidding, Ajay. I'll walk by like I don't know you. Let's keep it simple. I have to go home after work. Don't forget, besides Daniel, I have a cat named Thomas. And he's waiting for me. I'll take a cab myself. Am I doing your bidding again? Ajay laughed. Well, I guess that's the fate of some men, to wait for their sweethearts. Virginia, life is so short, and we're all waiting for something, he sighed. What are you starting, Ajay? Everything has been said and decided long ago. Everything will be as it is, Virginia said. I love you. I love you. And I'll never stop telling you that, Virginia, he said. Usually men say it before, Virginia joked. You say it after. You're not the right kind of lover. I've always said it, and I'll keep saying it until you get tired of it, Ajay smiled. Don't expect I won't, Virginia smiled back. He saw her smile even in the dark and kissed the corner of her lips. I'm glad I'll wake up with you in the morning. You don't realize how beautiful you are when you sleep. I've been looking at you and looking at you and looking at you. They say when you not only want to fall asleep but also wake up with that person, that's true love. Virginia, you're the one I want to wake up with every morning, Ajay said. You're at it again, Ajay, over and over again. Why doesn't Virginia tell Daniel you're his father? You tell him stories about a father who doesn't exist, and yet you're right there with us, and yet you're far away from us. Who needs that? Virginia, I want to be with you all the time, to take care of you every day. All women dream of that, but you don't. I can see you're worried about a difficult situation, Virginia. And you have serious concerns about how you're going to talk about it and what the repercussions will be for those around you. You know why I can't tell you now. And it's for the best, Virginia said. It's still a deception, no matter how you look at it. You think this deception is your way of keeping my marriage to Olivia alive. It's long gone. You of all people know that. Bridget's an adult with her own life. I don't see how we're going to be able to tell everyone, she asked glumly. Do you have any idea how many people we'd hurt, how many people we'd make unhappy? Olivia, her mother, Bridget, my parents, Daniel. There's no telling who else will be in this line because of the two of us. A lot of people's lives will change. And the fact that I'm sleeping with you, my best friend's husband, and she doesn't know. I'm sure she's complaining to you about how impotent I am, that I have tons of mistresses. Doesn't that change someone's life? Listening to her, you must sympathize. And she doesn't suspect a thing, Virginia continued. I wonder what you told her about Daniel's father? I told her it was a resort affair. And everyone's blind, they can't see that he looks like you. Or they don't want to see. I don't know. They do. They don't, but it's more peaceful. Can you imagine the town turning against my parents when they find out I stole my husband from my best friend who I grew up with since I was a kid? Okay, other people. But Olivia's mother is my parents' neighbor. How are they supposed to live with their houses next to each other? Virginia asked AJ. How, AJ, can you answer all my questions for me? And how do I explain to Daniel that Uncle AJ is not only Bridget's dad, but also his dad? What about us, Virginia? AJ sighed. We don't. Soon you won't need sex, and you'll start to forget about me. What's that got to do with it? Virginia wondered. You see, I'm getting older. I don't want to be with Olivia. I want to be with you. I'm going to be a boring old woman. Virginia tried to turn the conversation into a joke. I'll be nagging you, shuffling my feet. Perhaps I will sing ugly, weak because of my weak voice. Then you'll realize what a mistake you've made, said Virginia. Falling for my charms when you were young. What about Olivia? Does she smoke? Does she drink her coffee? That's the way she's always been. That's the way she'll always be. And if you don't touch her, she won't touch anyone. And I want you to touch me and grumble. And I'd hug you and smile, and you'd stop grumbling, she continued. And tomorrow I'll turn you on your side, and you'd stop singing. And that you'll be ugly, I'll never believe that. You'll always be beautiful to me. All right, AJ, let's make a bet. It's almost morning. Let's do it. I love waking up first and watching you sleep. He kissed her on the temple, and she woke up, reached up and hugged him. Is that what you're doing to me? Ajay smiled and hugged Virginia. I gotta go, Virginia said, trying to get out of his embrace. Olivia is on the first bus to arrive. She told me about it. Do you think she guesses and warned me on purpose? I don't know what she knows or doesn't know. We hardly talk to her, AJ replied. We'll get there in time, he said. AJ put his arms around Virginia and drew her to that height, that flight of feeling, where not only their bodies but their souls join. And right then, just in that moment, he felt that he and Virginia were one, inseparable. And now Virginia cried out and gratefully embraced Ajay. But the brightness of the orgasm was beginning to fade from the altitude in which they had taken flight. They were returning to everyday life. And now Virginia cried out and her body tensed. But unlike before, her arms didn't wrap around his neck. They slid off his shoulders. Virginia's body shuddered, and her frightened, fixed eyes stared at AJ with a glazed look. And he suddenly realized that she was not breathing. Virginia, Virginia, shouted Ajay, and began to shake her, trying to bring her back to life. He started CPR, but nothing worked. EJ called an ambulance and tried to breathe life into Virginia until it arrived. There's an ambulance outside our gate. Do you know who to see? The first thing Olivia asked when she entered the house. EJ stood at the window and, without turning around at his wife's voice, answered, "To our place." "Who?" "Us." Olivia wondered. Over there, he nodded toward the bedroom. "Virginia's in there." He turned, and Olivia saw that AJ was crying. He wiped the tears from his face with a quick motion and looked at Olivia in silence. She had never seen EJ cry before, and it struck her as much as Virginia and the EMTs in their bedroom. Without a word, Olivia opened the door with a sharp movement and saw her friend's naked body on the floor and the doctors putting some instruments into their cases. "Why is she on the floor?" Olivia asked, shocked. Apparently it was easier for the man to perform CPR that way, the doctor answered and added, "She's dead. The cause of death will be determined by the medical examiner. We've already called there. They'll come for the body soon." "She's dead," Olivia said confusedly as she came out of the bedroom. She slumped into a chair and pulled cigarettes out of her purse with a trembling hand. "I know," AJ answered without turning to look at his wife. There was silence. AJ was grateful that she wasn't interrogating him right now. He heard the coffee machine turn on. Apparently, a cigarette without coffee was unusual for Olivia. Olivia noisily sipped her coffee and flapped her nose. "Crying?" AJ wondered. Didn't she understand anything? Olivia was indeed crying. Turning to her, he saw her wiping away her tears and blowing her nose loudly into her handkerchief. "What's going to happen now?" Without looking at her husband, she asked. "I have to meet Daniel tonight. He's there, at Virginia's parents'." "I have to tell her parents. Can you do that?" "I can do that. I'll let them know." "Thank you." "For what?" "Thank you for not asking me anything. We'll talk about it later." "There's nothing to talk about," Olivia said. Olivia took a deep breath and said, "If I've been silent all this time, it's not because I'm so stupid that I can't see what's going on. I've seen it all, and I see it all. Is Daniel your son? You don't have to answer that. I already know he's your son. But we'll talk about that later, not now." "Thank you, Olivia," Jay said. The car from the morgue arrived. Virginia's naked body was carried past Jay and Olivia. "It's over," Olivia said. "She's not coming back here." "Why did you say that, Olivia?" "Why?" Ajay asked. "To make you feel better. We're burying Virginia. You look like you've lost it. Her parents are elderly. We'll have to make the funeral arrangements. They'll probably want to bury her in her home village. I hope you realize no one wants all these juicy details for their own peace of mind. No one wants the truth. Not Virginia's mother, not her parents. And neither do Daniel and Bridget. And I thought it was time Daniel knew I was his father," Ajay said. "Not now. The boy is 11 years old, his mother's dead, and now you're the father." "Not now," Olivia objected. "How do we explain that Virginia died in our house? Let's say she didn't know I'd gone to my parents' house and came to see me. She got sick, and while the ambulance was on its way. A doctor again, and a doctor when she's gone. Vika, you understand. I loved her, and I love her," AJ said in a shaky voice. It hurt Olivia to hear it, but she wasn't going to make a scandal. She'd always been strong, and now, more than ever, she needed to stand firm, not comfort her flailing husband. "Stop being hysterical," Olivia said harshly. Don't you think I should be the one throwing tantrums, not you? You've always been a rock, impenetrable, indifferent. There's nothing feminine about you. Why should I love you? You're like a tank. Ajay wanted to say something, but he was stopped by a slap from Olivia. He stopped talking and stared at his wife with tears in his eyes. And then he calmed down. Keys to the apartment, Olivia demanded. Virginia, do you have keys? Olivia asked. Yes, go to the train station to pick up Bridget. Get some things for him at the apartment and come here. Will you be able to tell the baby? Ajay asked. No, I can't. How? How am I going to tell him? Olivia replied. I knew it. I'll have to go with you. Where's Mom? Daniel was surprised to see Uncle Ajay with Aunt Olivia. Come on, Daniel, let's go to the car. I'll explain everything to you, Olivia hugged the child. An unsuspecting Daniel smiled and looked at Uncle AJ. AJ turned away from the boy and cried. Did something happen? Daniel realized. Mommy, where's Mommy? The child asked with concern in his voice, tormenting EJ's soul. You what? Danielle shouted. Are you what? Where's Mommy? Mommy's not here anymore, replied Olivia. What do you mean, gone? You're what? Daniel shouted. People at the train station began to pay attention to them. Mom is dead, replied Olivia and hugged Daniel. The boy pushed Olivia away and ran, but she quickly caught up with him and hugged him tightly, not allowing him to break free. She looked at Ajay reproachfully. Not everyone is as tough as you are, Olivia said to him. Why are you standing there like that? They're waiting in the car. I hope I don't have to run with you. About 10 minutes later, Ajay and Olivia returned. The boy was crying his eyes out. Olivia hugged him, pulled him close and stroked his head the whole way. Pulmonary embolism. Cardiac arrest, instant death. That was the cause of Virginia's death. She was buried, as Olivia had expected, in her home village, where she had been born and where her parents had lived. Daniel stayed with his grandparents for the rest of the summer vacation. They had taken custody of him, and from the end of August, at Olivia's insistence, Daniel would have to live in her and Ajay's house. Why would he want to change from a city school to a country school? There are teachers and kids there that Daniel is used to. As a teenager, it's stressful for a child. Olivia argued. It wasn't enough for him to be stressed by his mother's death. Aunt Mary, Uncle Bill. Well, it's not like he's going to live from strangers. Then again, you're elderly people. Can you handle it? Olivia objected. Why, Olivia, why would you need such a burden? We're his relatives, we're his guardians, said Virginia's father. It is impossible for us to move to a one-room apartment in the city in our old age. Here on Earth we have lived all our lives, and here we will die. We need to think about Daniel now, not about whose blood related to whom, Olivia said. He's not a little boy anymore. Let's ask him what he thinks about it. No, I'm just going to my class. What about it? Daniel replied, confused, realizing that was impossible. Uncle AJ and I want you to live with us, Daniel. Then you can go to your own school and be in your own class. Can we do that? Daniel hesitated. You can and you should. But are we strangers to you? Thank you, Aunt Olivia. Daniel smiled and hugged Olivia. Ajay, what do you say? You're all quiet. Would Daniel be a burden to you? Virginia's mom asked. No, we're great friends of Daniel's, Ajay said. I think Olivia's right. He wanted to announce to everyone that Daniel was his son. How could he be against his son? But he realized Olivia was right. Right now, we have to get past Virginia's death. The news of his paternity would be too hard on everyone. After Virginia's funeral, Ajay took a vacation and drank. He hadn't been addicted to alcohol before, but now it had become his cure for losing his beloved. Maybe it's time to stop drinking. After 2 weeks of drinking, Bridget's wife asked, "We need to fix up Daniel's room. You can drink endlessly and reach the end of the road, but it's not going to bring Virginia back. Do you need to think about your son right now?" Sobbing drunkenly, "AJ, Daddy, you never understood me. All you ever wanted was money and nothing else. Virginia's gone and I don't want to live." "If you don't want to live, then don't live. But you have to live for others," Bridget replied. "What do you mean, don't live?" Ajay stared at her. He poured vodka into his mug and drank it in one gulp. He wrinkled his nose and asked his wife, "Are you suggesting that I kill myself? But if you don't want to live, you have to fight it, do something, catch up with your beloved." "Bridget, no insults. I understand you're going through an irreparable loss, Virginia's death. But it's wrong to vent your pain by blaming others. You're right. I didn't take responsibility for Daniel for mercenary reasons. I sincerely want him to be surrounded by care and love, to continue to learn in a familiar environment. This is now so important for the boy after the tragedy. I realize that I cannot fully understand your pain of losing the woman you love. Love is the greatest feeling that not everyone gets to experience in life. Virginia was your guiding star, and her passing has broken your heart. But the hatred and hurtful words against me are misplaced. You and I have traveled a long road together. Yes, our marriage wasn't perfect, but our son Daniel grew up in it. This is not the time for recriminations. Let's put aside past resentments and concentrate on the most important thing, our son, who was left without a mother. He needs our support and care. I say we stop fighting and get together to fix up Daniel's room. We'll renovate, create a cozy environment to make him feel at home. We'll discuss all the details. I'll allocate the necessary funds. For Daniel's sake, let's put aside our differences and join forces. It's already hard enough for the boy. Let's not add to his worries. Together we can get through this terrible grief. That's what I suggest." Bridget questioned Olivia's intentions. "Why would you do that? I don't understand your diabolical schemes. How can you talk about anything when you're drunk? If you were sober, I could answer your questions. And when you're sober, I'll tell you about my diabolical schemes. I'll explain why I didn't give you a divorce, why I didn't chase Virginia out of my house like the last creature she was. But then I'm afraid you'll lose heart." Ajay and Virginia were weak people. Two lovebirds met, but love alone is not enough to live. The weak must lean on the strong. To what? So the strong can crush them? I hate this hatred boiling up inside me. Hate is a feeling. Maybe it can sustain you in this drunken frenzy. Olivia turned on the coffee maker and lit a cigarette. She had no problem with Daniel's upbringing. Virginia seemed to have raised him right. He'd done well in school, and his teachers had praised him. At home, to Olivia's surprise, he was accustomed to independence. Like Bridget had once been, he didn't need to be reminded to keep his room in order. He was always neat. Virginia had been a perfectionist too. If she did something, she did it to perfection. But in her personal life, she had gotten Olivia's husband, who was far from perfect. But that's exactly how he seemed to Olivia. Maybe Virginia had a different opinion of him. Love is blind or blind to many things. Olivia's eyes weren't blinded by her love for EJ, and she knew he'd never loved her. He'd adored their daughter Bridget, though, for which Olivia was grateful. And until Bridget went to live with her boyfriend, divorce was out of the question. I wonder why he'd want a divorce now, Olivia thought. I mean, she was sure of herself. No, just because she'd slept with AJ didn't mean she was going to live with him. She loved her parents very much, and as long as they were alive, she wouldn't disturb their peace with a change in her personal life. Olivia realized that Virginia's personal life consisted of more than just seeing AJ. She was aware of that, so she was outwardly calm. She wasn't throwing tantrums or jealousy scenes. She was just keeping the situation under control. Otherwise, if Olivia made her knowledge of their connection public, it would only bring her friend closer to her husband. So she played dumb and kept her balance. Of course, it wasn't easy to smile at her bitch friend and complain to her about her impotent husband, knowing that Virginia was far from impotent. Virginia didn't seem to realize that Olivia knew about her affair with EJ. So she excitedly told her friend about her love affair with Max. "Olivia, you have no idea what he's like. He loves me so much. I can't see anyone else but him. Shall I introduce you?" Olivia laughed to herself, laughing and angry at the same time. "He's married. Don't hurt yourself, you fool." "But no, he won't. Can you believe his name is a J too?" "I can't imagine," Olivia replied as she continued to play her part. "Your husband? Yeah, but my AJ isn't as good as yours." "What's wrong with your AJ?" Virginia wondered. "Impotent, weak. If it wasn't for me, he'd still be in his buy more. I got him into the world. Everything he's got is because of me." "Why do you live with him?" Virginia wondered. "You talk about him like you don't love him." "Why should I love him?" "He doesn't love me either. He's got a fool like himself on the side, and they're enjoying each other. Let them enjoy each other. But I won't give him a divorce. I didn't spend so much effort on him to give him away." "Why a fool?" "Maybe she's the other one who's not a fool at all." "You don't say. If she's in love with him, she's a fool. How can you live like this without love?" "I don't understand." "It's easier," Olivia said sharply. Olivia retorted. "But what do you have to gain from your love? See each other once or twice a week? Texting? Is that what love is for? To have each other once in a while? Then it's not love, it's just a deal." "Our life is a bargain," replied Virginia. "Your husband asks you while he's got something working for him, and then you're alone as a wife. Are you alone?" "Why alone?" "I have a son, Daniel. I have a daughter too, but she has her own adult life. And your Daniel won't be a child forever. There will be grandchildren." Virginia smiled dreamily. "And what will you give your grandchildren? One room?" "I'm not divorcing my asshole so I don't have to share with him. I want to keep everything for Bridget." "But you know, if you live by that standard, what kind of life is that? It's just an ordinary life, no worse than anyone else's." "How do you think other people live?" "Floating in the clouds. Clouds are the element of birds. We humans are earthbound, materialistic creatures. You, Virginia, think about what you're saying and leave your man. Quietly find a normal man who doesn't sing your bedtime dithyrambs but earns money." "I can't do that. I need love." That was the last conversation I had with Virginia. Where did she push her? To an ignominious death in someone else's bed. Once again, Olivia has to cover up her lowlife. All because she's strong, not a sissy. But Ajay, on the other hand, is distraught over the death of his beloved. And Olivia can't help him pull himself together, be strong. She's strong, and here she is, powerless after work. To sleep. As EJ said himself, he takes 2 or 3 shots of vodka, and on weekends he gets drunk to a semi-conscious state. "Stop drinking," Olivia urged her husband. "Daniel sees you in a bad way. Let him see what you've done to his father. You brought this on yourself, and don't open your filthy mouth about being a father. Nobody wants that, especially you." "I'm lost," Olivia, drunken AJ, sobbed. "My Virginia is gone, and I'm gone with her. You're going to wait for me to ask the tenants out of the apartment, and I'm going to send you there too. I'm sick of looking at your drunken face and cleaning up after your drinking." "Don't clean up. I'll clean up, Olivia. Just don't move me into Virginia's apartment. I'll go crazy in there." "You will. You'll end up in a mental institution." although you'll probably stop drinking there. I'm done, Olivia promised a drunken Ajay. I'm done drinking. You'll see. Promises remain promises, and Olivia continued to watch EJ drink. Bridget's entreaties didn't work on him either. Dad, maybe it's time to get treatment for alcoholism, Bridget asked. Treatment for what? What are you, daughter and mother together? What am I, a drunk to get treatment? Ajay was getting drunk, and no one could resist it. He was tolerated at work for a long time. But after a couple of years, when they began to notice that at work he smelled of alcohol, he called his boss, asked him to write a letter of dismissal. Daniel's son, yelled a drunken AJ. At least you're not giving up on me, unlike Olivia. Uncle Ajay keeps saying I'm his son, Daniel said. I guess he thinks because you live with us, he can think of you as his son. He gets drunk and talks nonsense. The truth is, of course, he's not your father and you're not his son. Ignore what he says, Danielle. Olivia didn't understand what money Ajay was drinking on when he was out of work. Apparently he had some savings that she didn't know about, and that worried her greatly. Spending that kind of money was incredibly stupid. At the moment, their budget wasn't big enough for him to squander that much money. Sometimes she wished he would die so she could finally breathe free and not worry about anything, and she had plenty to worry about. If Daniel was known to be Ajay's son, then he would be his father's heir too, which meant she'd have to share it with him. That's why Olivia had taken Tammy into her home to, as they say, keep her finger on the pulse. Otherwise, you never know. Maybe Ajay would start traveling to the village to see Daniel's parents from the branch, and he'd let it slip that he was Daniel's father. This way, everything's in plain sight, everything's under control. He calls Daniel son, and she explains to the boy that it's Uncle Ajay's drunken ramblings. And she's got Ajay under her watch, everything under control. Had Ajay known that Bridget wasn't his daughter, but his old friend Mike. But she liked Mike, and he liked her. Maybe that's called love. Olivia doesn't remember anything about it now, but at the time she knew that nothing good was going to happen between her and Mike. Mike was the leader, and she was his equal. Then Olivia decided to marry the docile, quiet EJ who was graduating from college. She was glowing. You could say she'd gotten him into bed, and then presented him with her one-time pregnancy. Does that happen? Ajay wondered at the time. It was obvious he wasn't thrilled with the news, but he'd never given up on his marriage to Olivia. Not once did he doubt that Bridget was his daughter. Olivia saw that he loved Bridget more than Daniel. It was understandable. He saw her day in and day out, interacted with her, and she loved him. Sometimes it seemed to Olivia, or maybe it didn't even seem like it, that Bridget loved her father more than he loved her. It made her both happy and a little sad. But mostly, of course, it made her happy. It was a good thing Virginia was dead. No one would ever find out. AJ's getting drunker by the day, and no one listens to his drunken ramblings anymore. Well, Virginia's gone, so the secrets will remain secrets. When were Olivia and Virginia real? And there was no AJ standing between them. Olivia stupidly told her that Bridget wasn't Ajay's daughter, which she regretted. And when she found out about her husband's affair with her friend, she feared exposure. But Virginia kept quiet. Strangely enough, she didn't. Or maybe she'd just forgotten. Though it's hardly the sort of thing one forgets. But Olivia's secret was gone with her friend, and that was good for her. No, Daniel's presence was a little inconvenient. But it was such a small thing compared to what she would keep. Besides, Daniel provided for her financially the pension, the income from her mother's apartment. Her parents from the village tried to give her some money. And then, when Daniel turns 18, then let him move into his mother's apartment and live independently. By that time, Olivia hoped EJ would have already gone to heaven to his beloved, especially since he was so eager to go to her, so drunk. It's just impossible. That's all. No one to share it with. Everything will be left to her and Bridget. Aunt Olivia, I need to brush up on my English, get a tutor. Is that possible? Or I'm going to get in. A B's ruining the whole picture. I can't do it on my own. I need extra credit. As far as I know, chemistry and biology are important for college, not foreign language. How high do you think they're going? That's where they get in. Do you need the money? I don't think I'm aiming too high. Medicine is my thing. I'll do it on my own, Aunt Olivia, without the money. So you're turning me down? I don't know, of course. Maybe all the money goes to support me. Olivia was silent, wondering how she could refuse Daniel. Excuse me, I'll ask my grandparents, Daniel said, feeling awkward. Is it that there is no money for my son? Ajay intervened in the conversation. He seemed to be sleeping on the couch in the living room, where Olivia was watching TV, and under the influence of the green snake, he seemed to be sound asleep. Turns out he could hear everything. Good for you, son, for striving. You're good. There'll be money. I said it'll come. Ajay gave Olivia an angry look. Lately, Ajay had become aggressive. I guess it was the alcohol, and arguing with a tipsy Ajay was useless. What are you looking at me for? Said Ajay. Dad, don't. I'll ask my grandparents, Daniel said, realizing that he was the cause of an emerging scandal. What grandparents with a living father? And call me father, not dad. Father, that's all you are. Understand, Daniel? Father Daniel answered, confused. Calm down. We were just talking to Dania, discussing the matter. Didn't you hear me say no? Olivia said. Of course, if you have to, Dania. How many classes a week? I think 2 classes of an hour and a half. All right, go on, Danielle, we need to talk to Daddy. Thank you, Olivia. I really need this class. I told you, Ajay said to Olivia. I'm not a dad. I'm Donnie's dad. Okay, fine. Okay, Dad, Olivia winked at Daniel. As Daniel left to go to his room, EJ continued. Maxime, you demand money for Donnie's classes and you don't work for the man himself. What am I, a printing press? Have you been playing dumb? The money you get for Donnie, you don't spend it all on him. So in the time he's been living with us, I think a decent amount of my money has accumulated. And my labor doesn't count. Did you ask for it? I just don't know why. Maybe you thought you could make a profit off an orphan who was just yelling that he was the father. Olivia whispered. So, Daddy, get your ass up and get to work. Teach your son by example. I'll go and work. Oh, it's fresh in my mind, but I find that hard to believe. How long have you been doing nothing? On indefinite leave. You haven't counted. You're sitting on my neck and opening your mouth. You've got some nerve. I'm not sitting on your neck either. What are you drinking to? You don't know I don't take money from you. And your relatives give you money. It's a one-time job. It's time you got a regular job, Olivia said. When I have to, I will, Ajay replied. Olivia realized that the conversation wasn't going well. But it was a good thing that AJ hadn't completely drank his brains away and was still working. He drank on sprees, and between sprees he made money. He realized that his love of alcohol would not be tolerated at a regular job, so he worked at home doing term papers for students. And when there were no term papers, he earned money by technical translations. If it weren't for his nerves and alcohol, he could have tutored Daniel in English himself. But no, he couldn't. You have to be able to convey all the linguistic nuances, and that's the prerogative of a teacher, not a technical specialist. When AJ wasn't drinking, he was unbearable. His sullen look, his nagging, especially when Olivia smoked and drank coffee, Whenever he saw Olivia smoking and drinking coffee, he'd start yelling. Sometimes it got to the point where it looked like he was going to hit her. At those moments, Olivia wanted to strangle him, and she probably would have if she'd known she'd get away with it. Aunt Olivia, I'm sorry about the other day. I didn't think Daddy would react so violently. I thought he was asleep and couldn't hear. I wish I'd known. It's okay, I'm used to it, Olivia said lightly so Daniel wouldn't feel guilty. Daddy insists that you call him Daddy. It's the right thing to do. I don't know whether to argue with him or not. Danielle, you know how it ends. Well, if he wants to call me Dad, then call him Dad. What can I do about his drunken ramblings? Maybe you just don't like calling him that. That's a different matter. Then again, he's not going to let you off the hook with his obsession. On the contrary. You know, I didn't know my father. And I'm glad my dad wants me to call him Dad. So I'll call him Dad. That made things easier for everyone. From then on, Daniel called AJ Dad. And oddly enough to Olivia too. But AJ tried to live up to that title. He even drank less. And when he didn't drink, he made breakfast for Daniel, as he had for Bridget, and they ate breakfast together. AJ seemed motivated to live. And the whole picture was not to Olivia's liking. She was looking forward to the end. And it turned out to be back to the beginning, and maybe soon, very soon, Daniel would find out that he was really E.J.'s son. For now, you can write it off to EJ's drunken ramblings, but how it will turn out from here on out is unknown. But apparently it was enough for AJ that Daniel called him father. For now. And then Daniel went to the academy, which didn't make Olivia very happy. She wished he'd just go back to his apartment. For so many years she'd had to endure the presence of a child, a mistress, a husband. Not everyone would agree to that. She agreed and even called herself auntie, which she regretted more than once. If Daniel hadn't been in their house, maybe by now EJ would have died of drunkenness. But on the contrary, it was as if EJ was rising from the ashes. No, he hadn't stopped drinking, of course, but it was clear that he was struggling with his illness, albeit weakly. Unwilling, weak-willed EJ fought incredibly. And his binges became less frequent and shorter in duration. He even got better and fresher. He was far from dead, Olivia thought, but there was nothing she could do about it. She couldn't poison him like she'd poisoned her husband. Danny, happy birthday, son. You're an adult now, and you're entering adulthood. AJ wept. Don't forget, no matter what happens, we are always with you and will always help you. At the festive table gathered the closest people, Virginia's mother and father, Olivia's mother Bridget, and her husband. For so many years, everyone had gotten used to AJ calling Daniel his son and Daniel AJ his father. Only Olivia won't get used to it. And it's a good thing AJ hasn't completely brain drunk and claimed his true paternity. After all, he does consider the fact that Virginia's parents are still alive and understands that Virginia wouldn't want everyone to know the truth. Honors her memory, Olivia thought. I don't know what I would do without you, Aunt Olivia, without you, Father, without all of you. Thank you for everything. But I can live on my own now. I've made up my mind. I can, Daniel said, seeing his grandmother's frightened look. I can do it. Don't worry about me so much, he smiled at his grandparents. Daniel's right, Olivia said. He's such a self-reliant young man. He came to us, and he knew how to do everything. Thanks to my mom. She taught me everything. Let's drink to Mom, in her memory. Daniel suggested it. She would be happy for me right now and proud of me. A happy memory to Virginia, everyone whispered, except Olivia. They sipped from their glasses and blotted their tears. And I, Danielle, don't agree with you, moving AJ interrupted the silence. What's stopping you from staying here? Have you been unhappy all these years? I'm fine, everyone, thank you. But as they say, it's time to get used to being on your own. You'll forget us in no time. Saddened, a tipsy AJ, Who am I supposed to make breakfast for? Who am I going to have breakfast with? Olivia, Daniel answered. Ajay looked at Olivia and sighed. Danielle, let me stay with you for a week, clean up, and then I'll take in the tenants, Grandma suggested. I'm going to make repairs in the summer, on vacation, and now just to clean up. Stay, Grandma. Under your careful guidance, I'll put things in order. Are you okay, Grandpa? Permission? Grandma asked. I'll allow it. But only for a week. I need it myself. Grandma smiled, Virginia's father, and everyone laughed. When Daniel came home from class, he found his grandmother with the secretary open and a pile of papers and receipts taken out of it. What's this? Daniel asked. What is it, Daniel? Cried Grandma, raising her eyes to her grandson. Yes, Anushka, these are your old letters. Grandma. So it turns out that AJ is your real father? Daniel asked in a trembling voice. Grandma held out a thick notebook to him with a trembling hand. On the pages were entries made by his mother's hand. This is Mom's diary, Grandma said. Flip through the pages, just as it was written. It appears so, Grandma replied. It's so personal, but you have a right to know the truth, Danielle. You're a big boy. Maybe it's time for everyone to know the truth. Maybe it's not. Grandma said with doubt in her voice. What will happen to everyone when they find out? I can't imagine what will happen to Grandpa. I'm scared. What about Olivia? She raised you for so many years without knowing the truth. What do you think, Danielle? What do we do? I don't know, Grandma. I have no idea, Daniel answered. I'll read the whole diary, and then you and I will decide what to do. You look so pale. How sick are you? Do you need any medicine? I'll take a drink and calm down, and I'll call my grandfather. How he is there, I'll find out, said the grandmother, confused. So it turns out how it was. After reading his mother's diary, Daniel thought, it's not that simple. For obvious reasons, Mom didn't want this to be known. So now what? Should this secret be kept further from my grandmother and me or not? I wonder if my dad knows that my sister didn't know about it before either, judging from my mom's notes. But it's not my secret, and I don't think I should make it public. Who's going to feel better about it? Bridget, Dad, Aunt Olivia, Grandpa. After Mom died, Aunt Olivia became his second mother. It was her choice. So she didn't know that Dad and Mom loved each other and that I was really her husband's son. Because what normal woman would take in the son of her husband's mistress? So if she and Grandma reveal this truth, a lot of good people will suffer. No, we shouldn't do that. Let it go as it is. Life will sort things out. But how he wanted to tell his father the truth, that he knew about their love with his mother, how he wanted his father to know that he, Daniel, knew the truth. Couldn't it be okay to tell his father? Daniel thought. From the lines of the diary, it is clear that my father recognized me as his son. Many questions did not find an answer in Daniel's mind, and he didn't know what the right thing to do was. Between the pages of the diary, he found a photo of his mother and father together. So young and happy they were in the picture. Dad, how much I look like him. I'm just now seeing it, Daniel thought. At first glance, you'd think it was me hugging my mom. Daniel found a suitable photo frame, inserted the picture into it, and set it on his desk. He smiled at the picture of his parents and his thoughts. His mom is gone, but he has his dad, and no one can take that away from him. Grandma, how is Grandpa without you? Didn't you tell him anything? Daniel asked. He only misses me. We were never apart. And now, no, I didn't. What if I had a heart attack, and he's alone there? Grandma, go to him. There's no reason for you to stay here. You looked at me and realized that I'm quite independent. I'll manage. I understand. But my soul still hurts, sighed Grandma. "Grandma, stop it. Here, sit here." Daniel sat his grandmother down at the dining table, made tea, poured it into cups, cut a loaf, took out butter, cheese, and sausage from the refrigerator. "How am I doing?" Smiling, he asked his grandmother. "Are you coping?" "I'm aching for something else." "What's going to happen now, Daniel? I'm talking about what you and I found out." "Nothing's going to happen. You know my father knows, and I know. And I don't think anyone else needs to know. Grandpa's a heart patient, Mother. Aunt Olivia's old, and I don't think she's in good health either. And Aunt Olivia herself, what if she finds out? I feel sorry for her. Who's going to be happy or healthy, Grandma? No one." Granny sighed. "You're so young, Daniel. And how wise you are. Virginia would be happy to see you. So no talking?" Silent. Then Daniel agreed. "And Bridget, it turns out, is not Ajay's own daughter." "Do you think he knows that?" Danielle asked. "Maybe he already knows that, Grandma. You and I better stay out of it. It's not our secret anymore." "I don't think so. And I somehow doubt that I, the old me, I may not understand something," replied Grandma. "You said that no one needs such truth. Explain to me, and I agree with you. If I didn't, I might tell someone I shouldn't." Daniel often went to visit his father and Olivia activities. Life and Aunt Olivia didn't like him very much. His father was always happy, even when he was working. He'd put his work aside, set the table, treat him. But Aunt Olivia smoked cigarettes and drank coffee, never sat down at the table with them, and never really kept up a conversation. She'd ask, "How are you?" and that was it. Daniel even felt uncomfortable. He'd lived in their house for so many years, everything was fine. Suddenly it's uncomfortable. "Why are you so glum, Daniel?" his father asked him once as he walked him out the gate of his house. "Are your studies not going well?" "School's fine. You know, Father, when I come to see you in general, I don't feel like Aunt Olivia's happy to see me. It's as if she wants to, but she can't tell me not to come to you. I don't understand. I've lived with you for so many years, and suddenly there's such a change in her attitude toward me. It's not right for me to discuss my wife with you, son," he said. "But Olivia is a moody person, and if she's in a bad mood, she's not going to hide it. And to be honest, this woman remains a mystery to me. In all the years we've been together, I've never really understood her." "In short, Dad, you come to my place," Daniel suggested. "I just moved into Mom's apartment. You've never been to my place. Come on over, because I don't really feel like I'm at your place. I don't really feel, Dad, I feel a little overweight. What do you think? Call me, or I might not be home without a call," Daniel said to his father. "You really haven't been to my place. I'll come and see you." Nothing's changed since Virginia's gone. EJ walked around the apartment as if she'd gone out for a minute and was coming back from her memories. Tears came to Ajay's eyes. To keep Daniel from seeing them, he turned to the table and pretended to look at something there. "Is this the table where you study?" "He wasn't exactly here," Ajay said. His heart jumped and froze. Then it pounded so loudly that even Daniel seemed to hear it. Ajay gently took the photo from the table, brought it almost close to his face, shielding the tears from his son with it, and swallowing the lump in his throat, asked, "Did you know, Daniel? And how did you forget to hide the photo?" Daniel was confused at first, but then thought, that's even better. At least he and his father won't have any misunderstandings. "I found out when I moved here. My grandmother was cleaning and found my mom's diary. I got it from the diary. And I didn't tell you. I didn't know whether to speak or not. I mean, the truth could hurt a lot of people." "You're right, son. The truth hurts a lot of people, but lies hurt even more," Ajay replied. "I'm glad you know. Virginia wanted to keep it a secret for the sake of everyone's peace of mind. But as it turns out, "Dad, let's go to the kitchen. I bought a cake. Would you like some tea? I have a terrible sweet tooth like Virginia. She had a sweet tooth too. Come on, we'll have tea. But there's a lot of things we need to talk about. You're an adult. You should know everything." "Isn't there anything stronger than tea?" Ajay asked. "No, Dad, I don't drink." "Please don't drink it either," Daniel asked. Ajay suddenly jumped up from his chair and hugged his son tightly. My son," he whispered. "I'm sorry for everything." "Dad, come on, Dad." "Forgive me for what?" "I have nothing to forgive you for," Daniel answered, hugging his father. "Yes, there is," said Ajay. "Well, let's go and drink tea. You're kind like your mother. And I was not known for anger. How do you like it, son, stronger?" "You know I like it strong." "I'm sorry I asked for alcohol," Daniel apologized. "Sometimes I want to get drunk, go to sleep, and never wake up in pain again." "I'm hot tea," Ajay replied. "I can't live without your mom. You're the only thing keeping me afloat. But if you loved each other so much, why didn't you live together? I would have left Olivia. I never loved her." "Yeah, your mom didn't want that," Ajay sighed. "She thought it would hurt a lot of people. She was worried about her parents. How would they take it? Especially since they're neighbors with Olivia's mother. And you realize that now. But Grandma knows now. She found the diary and read it. But we agreed not to tell anyone. We thought the truth would make a lot of people unhappy. Especially Aunt Olivia. That's what Virginia thought, too." Ajay grinned. "Olivia? Yeah, she knew all about us. Knew and kept quiet. It was to her advantage," he said bitterly. "Why?" Daniel wondered. "How can you stand it?" "You can't. What about me? How did she put up with me around her for so many years?" "I have some ideas about that. Olivia's used to being in control, which is why I think you're here. And then she realized that she could hold me back with you. She knew I wouldn't blab to Virginia's memory. You think I don't know that when I asked you to call me father, she chalked it up to my battered brain. In short, Olivia is unpredictable. Well, now your mom's journal has interfered with Olivia's plans besides me. And now you and your grandmother know about it. Who besides Olivia, at this point, is going to be made unhappy by this knowledge?" Danielle asked. "And Olivia's own mother? She has nothing to do with it." "I feel sorry for her," Ajay replied. "And Bridget? I guess you know the saying, better the bitter truth than the sweet lie. Don't follow in my footsteps, son, or I'll be in favor of. Lying is not what life is all about. And life doesn't stand still, and mine is about to end. And it turns out that I haven't really lived yet. I've lied, I've dodged and dodged. I'm living with someone I don't love. And it's for the benefit of someone, but not for myself," said EJ with a sigh. "Do you think everyone should know the truth?" Daniel asked. "I do. Yes," everyone. AJ nodded. "Can you give me Virginia's diary? At least I want to talk to her so badly." "I can, of course, but you'll have to give it back." "I'm afraid Aunt Olivia will see it and destroy it," Daniel replied, handing it to his father. "I did, son, but promise me that when I divorce Olivia, you'll give it back to me for good," AJ asked. "What are you doing?" "Yeah, I was going to divorce her, but she thinks it's my drunken ramblings. This time I'm going to file for divorce and property division. It's about time you took my last name and legalized my paternity. Let's formalize paternity first, change your last name, and then I'll file for divorce," he suggested. "I'd be happy to have your last name, father. But there's more secrets. It's the right thing to do, Danielle. Because Olivia is an unpredictable person. She can do all sorts of things," Ajay chuckled. "She's a Medea." "Oh, really, Dad? Really, Olivia?" "No. Why would you do that?" Daniel got worried. Oh, son, you don't know women. They're the cause of all our troubles. And they make us weak. That's right. I'm kidding, Ajay laughed. But it's time for me to go. The cake is delicious, by the way. I'll bring cake next time I come over. Give me Mom's diary. Just wrap it up in a bag, put it in a bag, because I don't have a bag. Well, his father left, and Daniel felt light and happy. Soon he would have his father's last name. He looked at the picture of his parents and saw several bills of money next to it. His father planted it, Daniel said aloud and smiled. Not believing his eyes, he read the note several times. Vika said Bridget is not Ajay's daughter. I thought she was joking. He even told her it wasn't April 1st and her kind of joke wouldn't fly. It's not a joke, she said. Really, that Virginia still wonders how he didn't get it. Bridget is a copy of her father, Mishka. She is a copy of her father's character. It's a little tough for a girl, but you need that nowadays. It's a time of tough people and grip and tact. My dear friend, do you think all men know who they're raising their own or other men's children? This woman knows who the child is from, and a man can either believe it or not. No, Olivia's not kidding. I don't know why she told me that. Maybe she couldn't bear to keep it to herself. No, of course not. I'm not going to tell Ajay. I don't want to hurt him. Besides, he loves Bridget. Not the kind of father who doesn't even know about his daughter. The kind of father who raised her. Ajay tensed up, his head thudding and pain echoing in his chest area. Bridget, not his daughter. No, he'd never compared her to anyone she looked or didn't look like. He was just sure she was his daughter. Anger swept over Ajay. Olivia had bound him to her. He'd put up with her all his life for Bridget's sake, loved someone else, and tolerated Olivia, even when she annoyed him to the point where he wanted to strangle her. He had. Bridget was always a light in the window for him. He was distracted by his daughter and forgave Olivia her dislike for him. And she, knowing he loved Virginia, forgave his dislike for her. That was how they lived in dislike. Before he went down to the kitchen where Olivia was, he breathed deeply, letting out the anger and all the demons that were pushing him to deal with Olivia. And when he had more or less calmed down, he left the room. You ready to go? Ajay asked sharply. 5 more minutes, and everything will be ready, Olivia answered. Are you hungry? Olivia looked at him, smiled, and turned away to slice bread. Ajay seemed strange to her, confused and tense at the same time. Probably work problems again, she thought and sighed. Bridget's not my daughter, Ajay said, sitting down at the table and keeping his eyes on Olivia. Olivia shuddered and tensed. Someone else might not have noticed it, but he'd learned every gesture she'd made over the years. He'd caught her off guard with his question. She didn't know whether to lie or tell the truth. Why aren't you saying anything, Olivia? I asked you a question, Ajay asked calmly. He calmed the storm that was brewing inside him as he read over and over the paragraph in the diary that said he wasn't the father of his daughter. Olivia tossed the knife she'd been cutting bread with and turned sharply toward Ajay. No, he couldn't read the fear in her face. It was more like triumph. She raised her head proudly and looked up at him, smiling. Well, yes, Bridget is not yours. So now what? I'm wondering how you know that. Virginia knew and no one else knew. And you kept quiet all this time, and now you want to find out. Olivia wondered. What's the point of all this fighting now? No, I didn't. I just found out. You lied, and it ruined your life. Oh, come on, don't be so hard on yourself. Olivia snorted. Virginia had told it in her diary and revealed the secret. So now you're going to give up on Bridget? No, I'm not. I raised Bridget, so she's my daughter and my grandchildren. But when I think that I could have had a different life, a happy life with the woman I love, And because of your lies, I missed her. I squeezed her out. But with the woman I love, I would have lived. Don't forget that you met your beloved thanks to me. Olivia smiled. You'd never see your beloved again. Where would you have met her? In a village you didn't even know the name of. I'm a fool. What is this? The snake was pulled out of the wilderness by a friend, the mother of her friends, Virginia. I felt sorry for her, and she returned the favor by being ungrateful. I don't want Bridget to know that I'm not her family, Olivia realized. That's all I want from you for now, and I won't. I know she loves you. Sometimes I think she loves you more than she loves me. And her kids adore you. What kind of evil am I, ruining all this? So Thomas didn't want to marry you. Are you trying to trick me? He didn't even know Bridget was his daughter. I knew even then that Thomas wouldn't make a husband or a father. He's a fickle man, not a husband. That's why I didn't tell him anything and decided to make you both husband and father. Oh, Olivia, you're so full of it. What's the point of rehashing old times, Ajay? We've lived our lives. And you were no angel, upsetting me with your friends and your antics. I raised your kid, you raised mine, and I've seen enough of your drinking. The debts are mine. What's the point of all this litigation now? As they say, you don't change horses at the crossroads. And you and I are already at an advanced age. Or is there something on your mind? Olivia turned on the coffee machine and lit a cigarette. Were we going already? Why is that smoke stinking up the place? Ajay asked unhappily. Olivia put out her cigarette, turned off the machine, and began to set the table. Olivia, I don't get it. For 8 years, Daniel had lived with us, and you treated him like a son? I respected you for it. What's different now? It's like you don't want him to come to us. When he lived here, I was more relaxed. Now it seems like he's coming for you, to take you away, Ajay laughed. Where? Nowhere. Where? Take you away from me, from our house. We didn't love each other and we don't love each other, but still. And tell me, do you believe that those who loved in their youth, after living such a long life as you and me, continue to love each other? I don't know. I haven't lived with my beloved, answered Ajay. And I know a few who have kept love, and the rest are like us, living out of habit. Again, children and grandchildren bind them. And you know what to expect from the one you live with? You're probably right. I think I'm probably right. What do you got there? Can't get enough of the good stuff? Lamb stew? Olivia replied. You're a good cook, that's for sure. Ajay moved his plate over to her. They say that the way to a man's heart is through his stomach. That's not true. I didn't reach your heart with my sincerity. Well, maybe it's not too late. Maybe I will. Flirtatiously looked at her husband, Olivia. I took the joke, smiled Ajay. And I'm not joking. I do not want to spend my old age alone, even though we live without love, but habit is a serious matter. I know that you are up there, upstairs, strictly teaching your translations that I should prepare food. Our grandchildren come and enjoy us, and we enjoy them. If all this is ruined, how can we live again? It's too late, Ajay, it's too late. And you're going to be alone. The kids have their own lives. It'll just be the two of us. Or do you think you'll meet another one like Virginia? You won't. There'll always be new people to compare her to. And she'll make the others pale in comparison. It's a long shot, Ajay. It's not the right age. Think about what I told you. Think hard. Have you noticed that we haven't really talked to each other in the last few years? Ajay asked. And today, what I found out today set us off on a revelation. We talked, and it wasn't as bad as it seemed. Ajay smiled. Bridget's pushing us toward each other again. Or is it just some kind of obsession? You women know how to work your magic, don't you? An hour ago, I was ready to kill you. And yesterday I wanted to divorce you, Ajay smiled. I guess the stew does have that effect on me. And now what? What now? Olivia looked at him anxiously, her hand reaching for her cigarette. Now, I don't know. I don't know anything, Ajay replied. I know. Olivia turned on the coffee machine. You don't have to break what you already have. If you promise that you won't divorce me, won't walk away from me at the sight of bread, tea, and coffee, then I'll accept you like family. And please, Ajay, stop drinking. Stop drinking. You can stop drinking. I know you're strong. Is he strong? She really thinks so. Ajay was surprised at his wife's words. She always thought he was weak. Now all of a sudden. Or is this another one of Olivia's tricks? And you stop drinking liters of coffee and smoking, said Ajay. Can I not smoke? Yes, you can. When I'm nervous, that's when I reach for a cigarette. You can drink coffee, but if you drink a little, you can't drink too much in your heart, said Ajay, smiling. Daniel knows I'm his father. He got it from Virginia's diary, Ajay said. Olivia shuddered. I'm going to give him my last name. I wanted to keep it a secret from you. But you blabbed, Ajay continued. Then everyone will know. Almost everyone knows. Then he'll claim our house. That's right. Bridget is the heiress, and Bridget is our daughter, and Daniel is our son. I don't want to lose the house. Olivia's lips quivered and she cried. I've put so much effort into it. I want to live in it until the end, until my end. I feel it as mine. And the house feels it. I've grown into it. So who's chasing you out of it? You want to divorce me? Which means if anything happens to you, Danielle's going to want a piece of it. My house would be torn apart. Olivia wouldn't stop crying. Which means I'd be torn apart. She finished one cigarette, but she should have smoked another. Her hands were shaking, her voice was breaking, and he looked at her, her shoulders were shaking. But on her tired and already not young face, and he felt incredibly sorry for her. He caught himself that in all his life he had never once pitied her. And she had never cried. Never. And now Olivia and he, Ajay, were getting weaker. Ajay realized she needed him. And he needs her. Need her, strangely enough. And not just because he suddenly felt love. Pity is stronger than love. He just realized that now. He went to her, took the cigarette from her hands, put it out and hugged her. The one he had been ready to kill an hour earlier. Don't cry, Kiran, don't cry. Everything will be all right. No one will ever kick you out of this house. We'll just make a will for each other, and if either of us dies. Anyway, is that any way you believe me? Not stopping crying, Olivia nodded affirmatively and hugged Ajay. Will you forgive me? She asked Ajay. There's nothing to forgive, Bridget. My daughter, Ajay replied. Olivia just said he was strong. She was wrong. He's weak in front of women, in front of their tears, weak. Women have a way of making men weak. How do they do it? Ajay thought, holding Olivia in his arms.